Welcome to the Jamal Thomas Morning Show. I hope you guys are doing all right. Can you hear me this morning? I want to make sure that you guys can hear me all right. I moved the mic a bit away because I was having weird sound stuff going on, and I want to make sure that there's no oddities associated with it. Excellent. Sarah Jack, thank you for that. And good morning, all of you. As I always say, you guys can be anywhere. So the fact that you're here, I appreciate it deeply, immensely. And I mean that. Apologies for the late start. I dropped a cup of coffee the moment that I put the coffee down and tried to sit down at the table. There's still water everywhere, but that's okay. It'll evaporate. No issues. A lot of news stories are taking place, and I want to use this morning to cover many of these stories. Wild stuff. One of the first issues that we probably should hit, Tulsi Gabbard. Tulsi Gabbard. Tulsi Gabbard, who there was concerns about whether or not she was going to be able to make it through the nomination process. It seems that those concerns have been put to rest. Tulsi is effectively a shoo-in. She's been able to clear the latest, I guess, the main Senate hurdle, and she's going to be put up for confirmation. Right here. The GOP-controlled Senate on Monday voted to advance the nomination of Tulsi Gabbard to be President Donald Trump's Director of National Intelligence, putting her on path for confirmation this week. The party line vote, 52-46, with all Republicans voting in favor of Tulsi Gabbard. Senator Tom Tillis, Republican of North Carolina, Fetterman, did not show up for the vote. Last week, Gabbard's nomination as the nation's top-ranking intelligence official squeaked through the Senate Intelligence Committee with a party line vote of 9-8. I don't care that it was a party line vote. I don't care that she, quote unquote, squeaked through. I care about the fact that she is on her way to confirmation. I love the fact that Tulsi has been put up for this. I love the fact that she's going to be head of the Department of National Intelligence. And at the very least, somebody who was willing at various points to call a spade, specifically on the notion of the Syrian chemical weapons strike, but also on this notion that we are overthrowing governments. And in overthrowing governments, we are effectively putting in dictators. I mean, she pointed out, not dictators, but jihadists into these positions. She pointed this out at the Senate confirmation hearing, which is mind-blowing. Just mind-blowing that ends up getting put into the national record. So, Tulsi is on her way to confirmation. I am happy about that. This is one of those things that I think Donald Trump did right. One of my biggest issues with the way the Democratic Party is effectively functioned is this notion of forever wars. And just because Donald Trump takes a position on something doesn't mean the position is inherently wrong. Meaning, you could take a position, you may not like Trump. Fair enough. I don't like Trump. I thought Trump should have been put in a cage after that last election. But that is secondary to him doing something that just so happens to be right. And if he's trying to make agreements to end wars, I define that as being right. Democrats don't. And because they don't, any person who comes out who challenges seemingly the intelligence security complex, they attack. Especially if it was initially one of their own, which, as you remember, Tulsi Gabbard was a Democrat. She was a Democrat that was pretty clear about these kind of foreign wars and foreign entanglements. And this was something that chafed against people like Hillary Clinton that are part of the Democratic Party. You could say it's a fulcrum, the backbone of the Democratic Party. Maybe not so much today, but definitely during that particular time period. So she ends up getting closer to Trump. Trump sees something in her, brings her onto the team, and Gabbard, head of DNA. Great. Great. No issue with this. No issue. Some of the other people are lunatics. Gabbard is a good pick. RFK Jr. also is a good pick. And it seems that RFK Jr. is also going to be make it through, despite some of the concerns by some of the other people in the opposite party. So this is good. I applaud this. I appreciate this. it also shows something else. There were several other Republicans that didn't necessarily want Gabbard in that position. It didn't seem to matter. Donald Trump's power in all of this seems to have gone through the levels of Congress. And I mean that in a few points. This story and another story I want to hit. But on this story specifically, it seems that Donald Trump and his gravity has been able to get people on board, on the same page, regardless of their own personal, inhibitions about having somebody like Gabbard in that position. Meaning Donald Trump got what he wanted, despite their own concerns, which is pretty astonishing. But it does show Donald Trump's influence on Congress. Now, what that means going forward in regards to later legislation, who knows? Is there a limit to that power? Usually the answer is yes, but again, who knows? At the very least, in the very beginning, they're giving him his team and the team that he wants, and he seems to be getting all of them. So, Gabbard, good job. Good job. Good job. Good job. Right here. Navy vet. It says, what is the sense of going to a Catholic church if you don't know what is being sold? Today, the Mass is English, all of the languages, and all folks get the word of God, I guess. Okay, I have no idea what that meant. Let's go somebody else. Someone let her know that, okay. I don't know what's going on in the chat, but fair enough. People are talking. That's good enough. One of the other stories that has to hit the headlines, because I think it's a big deal. Secret JFK files. Secret JFK files. Now, John F. Kennedy has been assassinated, 70 years ago, if not longer. And yet, we still don't have all of the information as Americans of how a president gets gunned down in Texas. I mean, you can watch the video. They blew his head off. His wife jumps to the back trying to grab part of his brain and skull. It is utterly gruesome. And yet, we can watch it. We had stories of a magic bullet, meaning there is extreme skepticism on the story that is being put out in regards to how Kennedy was killed and whether or not it was Oswald with a single shooter that was able to pull that off. People have various doubts. Those doubts are amplified in the way that Oswald was killed, meaning he had never got a chance to actually talk or tell his story of events. And so when you also add to that you have all of these files that are still under lock and key, like 60, 70 years after the fact, it breeds skepticism. It breeds a certain amount of, we don't believe we're getting the full story. Something here is not being told and not being told honestly. Why wouldn't you come to that assessment when you find out that all of these files are being hidden? Now, Donald Trump, I think it was last week, came out and said, release the files. All of them. Release the files. And gave a presidential order to release the files on JFK, Martin Luther King, in their entirety. Now, apparently, there's a fight going on in regards to these files being released. What gets redacted, what's exposed. And again, that adds skepticism to the story that comes out of the U.S. government during that time frame that effectively said a guy with a single gun was able to pull this off. So we are waiting on these files. As we wait on these files, we are told, or at the very least, it has been revealed, this 2,400 additional files, pages, whatever you want to call it, has been revealed. The FBI found secret JFK assassination records after the Trump order. The FBI just discovered about 2,400 records tied to President Kennedy's assassination that were never provided to the board tasked with reviewing and disclosing the documents, Axios has learned. The still secret records are contained in 14,000 pages of documents that the FBI found in a reviewing triggered by President Donald Trump, January 23rd executive order demanding the release of all JFK assassination records. The discovery, 61 years. 61 years. And understand the gravity of this. You had, if I'm not mistaken, the church committee that was responsible for ensuring that this information was reviewed and got out. And now they're finding all of these documents that apparently were never turned over to the original committee that was supposed to be reviewing the JFK assassination. So how can we say that we've come to the correct assessment in regards to how JFK was killed if the committee that was supposed to do that assessment was not giving all the documents in order to review, to have an accurate accounting of what happened? That's the question, right? It has to be the question. I mean, after all, if we're saying we're setting up a committee to figure out how was the U.S. president, a beloved U.S. president, was killed, how did that happen? That is a big deal. And this is on top of another president who was not beloved, was nearly whacked twice. If you make a committee and say, go out and figure out how this happened, and 60 years later, you find out, by the way, the committee that was commissioned to find out what happened, how was he killed, to give the American public the details of that assassination, and you find out that that committee who was designed to figure out what happened was not given the information necessary to figure out what happened, that something was being withheld, something wasn't necessarily being disclosed. Okay, then right off the bat, the suspicions that people have about what actually happened with the JFK assassination are inflamed. Now, keep in mind, Donald Trump is not doing this randomly. This is not just kind of Trump being Trump. RFK Jr., I would argue, did have political effect working with the Trump team. And with that political effect, Trump said, if you want those files open, I'll give you the files. Meaning, you come work with me, you fight for me, you try to get me in office. When I get in, I will open the files so you can see for yourself what is there, what's being disclosed, what was not disclosed. Because keep in mind, RFK Jr. fully believes that the CIA had his brother or had his uncle killed. He doesn't believe the main narrative associated with the story of how JFK was killed. So obviously, RFK Jr., who has deep concerns, skepticisms about how a U.S. president was effectively whacked, wants to see it. That was the deal. Trump is upholding and fulfilling the deal. Not to mention, he told the American public that he was going to do it too, but I suspect that's secondary. It was RFK Kennedy Jr. and his association with Donald Trump. Trump is fulfilling his obligation to RFK Jr. But more importantly, despite, whatever took prominence in this, is we see the files as an American public. And we get some clarity on what happened. It's not about the release of the files. It's about what actually happened. Those are different things. They can release the files and still have the information so redacted that you can't necessarily discern what is happening in these files. They do it in the UFO literature all the time. Meaning you could get pages of documents and most of those documents redacted. That could happen. You could get documents that spin you in a particular direction based on those redactions that, again, doesn't really give you the honest-to-God truth of what occurred and why it occurred. I hope you get my point. Documents being released is secondary to getting the actual information and data that you want to discern reality. Reality is something else. So the fact that these are being released, this is great. But the main point is, of course, getting the details of what actually occurred. Still secret records are contained within 14,000 pages of documents. Yeah, okay, so this is increased. Okay, so I'm not insane. Okay, something is weird. It's that the FBI just, I see. Records versus pages. Okay, I see. We will have to see when these finally get disclosed. At this point, we don't have those records. They have not been released yet. Right here is this quote. This is huge. It shows the FBI is taking this seriously, says Jeffrey Morley, an expert on the assassination of the president and nonpartisan Marcy Purcell Foundation, the nation's largest source of online records of the JFK killing. He sued the U.S. government for more records. Quote, the FBI is finally saying, let's respond to the president's order, unquote, instead of keeping the records secret, Morley has said. This is good. This is good. I don't know why it takes Trump to do this. I just don't. Look, I made a video talking about this whole simping for Trump stuff. And I made that video because I try to get across that for me, I don't have a dog in the hunt. At least I don't feel like I do. Obviously I do, but I don't feel like it. And what I mean by that is I don't like either political party. I don't have an expectation of getting anything from either. And God, man, even saying this puts me in this kind of spot of listening to. So a nurse trained me to do a procedure. And him and I got to know each other very well because we trained together over a period of time, over weeks. He was a hardcore, staunch Republican, full-blown Republican. And in his mind, I remember this very speech that he gave me one day, because at that time I was a hardcore lefty, and a lefty in the Democratic Party sense. And he says, I have no expectation of getting anything out of either political party. And the only reason that I end up voting Republican is because they leave me alone. Because I don't have any expectations. That the party that leaves me alone the most is the one that I err towards. It's not about them being right. It's not about them being wrong. It's not about them being honest. Not about any of that. It's about them leaving me alone. I have no expectations. Because I have no expectations, I just want to be left to my devices. And when I heard him say that, I'm like, yeah, but dude, you could get those things. You could politically push for those things. It is your right as an American to push for those things, to create movements, to work with movements in order to accomplish those objectives. From his point of view, I have no expectation or belief that that's going to happen. And I find myself being in somewhat of a similar spot. Maybe not as cynical as that, but definitely in this context of currently, I have no vehicle. That's the way I look at it. So you must understand, I end up in a position of spot checks. Of, do I like this or do I like that? I like this. I don't care who did it. I like it. And I need to, it's a very weird place for me to be like, okay, well, why couldn't a Democrat do this? Why couldn't Obama do this? He was black. And that came across weird. I'm asking, why couldn't Obama do this? And I'm saying, as a black president, part of the reason that people voted for him is because of this expectation that he was going to rip the chains off. Meaning, in a weird way, there were whites who voted for Obama believing that he was going to be more like Trump. That may blow your mind, but it is true. I've spoken to people saying I voted for him because he was black. And I thought that he was not necessarily going to be the same Democrat that they've been getting since Bill Clinton. I was shocked by that conversation, but I've had the conversation with at least one white person who didn't necessarily like Democrats all that much, but believed that Obama was going to be this kind of rebel rouser in that position. That's not what we got. We got a president who's like, I'm black, I can't cross out the lines, and so I'm going to be a competent management of empire. That's what I'm going to be, a competent manager of empire. And for all intents and purposes, Obama was a competent manager of empire. Again, empire, killing people abroad, drone strikes, all that stuff. Obama was that guy. Protecting a city group or having most people in his campaign being a city group, he was that guy. So, in an odd way, some of the stuff that Trump is doing, this kind of rebel rouser stuff, released in the JFK files, released in the MLK files, you have to ask yourself, why couldn't a Democrat do that? What does he lose in doing that? What is the political cost of doing that? Is it just something that they don't care about? And why don't you care about it, considering JFK was a Democrat, right? So when I'm like, this is great, this is not, this is great, and Donald Trump is awesome, it's Donald Trump is an ogre, and this is great. And why does it take an ogre to do this? Those are honest questions. I don't, that's not rhetorical. Well, I guess it is rhetorical because I'm sitting in my room by myself. But those are honest questions in regards to why was one able to do this, but the other wasn't. And do you honestly believe that in the context of the way the American public views this, that there's a political cost? There is not a cost. politically anyway, not from the standpoint of the American public, there is not a cost. Yeah. Look, I would tell you, the way that Americans look at this is, why did it take 60 years? I guarantee you that if you throw a rock and go out and talk to an American and ask them, are you okay with Donald Trump releasing the JFK files and the MLK files? They're going to say, obviously, of course we are. So if that is true, which it is, then why did it take 60 years to do it? And why did it take Trump to be the person to do it? And on some level, the question answers itself. JFK had made this point of saying he was going to smash the CIA into 1,000 pieces, something to that effect, especially after the Castro thing in Cuba. The name is eluding me. It'll come to me in a moment. Damn it, it'll come to me in a moment. Basically, sending all those people to try to overthrow Castro and the Bay of Pigs disaster. So he was skeptical of CIA and Intel already. Trump has an intel operation that tries to effectively overthrow his government using this notion of Trump and Russia. And fundamentally, for the majority of his term, has him in a bind on those issues because they're investigating him for something that effectively didn't take place. It was a canard. It didn't exist. And yet they still whipped up an investigation that if they would have found anything, any thinnest piece of anything, Trump would have been prosecuted and Trump might have been taken out of office. So you can imagine that Trump, who looks at that and says, they try to take me out of office. These spooks try to take me out of office. Okay, so what do you do with that? If you're a U.S. president, they throw everything at you. And when I mean everything at you, lawsuits, criminal cases, they try to put you in a cage. And not just try to put you in a cage, they try to take you out of office in your first term, legally elected term. What do you do with that? When you finally get back into office. And you don't just get back into office through some coup. You don't get in. You get in because you were voted in, and voted in by a majority of Americans, winning the popular vote and the Electoral College. You won both. And you squandered any and everything that the Democratic Party did legally, meaning within the context of the law, like in running an election, and everything that they were doing, what I would call extra constitutionally with these lawsuits, this lawfare. You win. What do you do? And do you have a certain dark view of the institution that tried to take you out of office? Well, obviously the answer is yes. You will be skeptical by definition, because from your point of view, and I think the point of view is valid, an intel operation did any and everything in their power to rob you of your legitimate presidency. Whether I like it or not, as I've told you, I thought Trump should have been put in a cage after the last time he lost and claimed that, he won the election from Joe Biden. But all that's secondary. He won. The American public saw fit to put him back in office. And they saw fit to put him back in office for reasons. Whatever those reasons were, he was able to cobble together a coalition to get back into power. You're now back into power. You're at the height of your power, the zenith of your capabilities as a president. And what does Trump do? He says, fuck it all. I am going to reshape not just domestic order, but I am going to reshape international order also. Full stop. I'm an American president. We play around with this idea that we have allies. That is out the window. I'm going to rip the mask off. Close face. Leaning head. This is who we are in this new world. And he decides to use and to full well test, because that's what's happening, presidential authority, and not just presidential authority, but U.S. capability to reshape world order. That's astonishing. Any way you look at it, that is astonishing. Is it to the better or to the worse? Is what is being asked. And I suspect reality is going to assert itself on whether it's to the better or to the worse. But I'm saying that is what he is trying to do. In the domestic sense, he does not have this fervish devotion to the intelligence services in the way that Democrats do. And because he doesn't have this slavish devotion the intelligence services, and the things that those things do here and abroad. I mean, there's a belief that USAID was instrumental, or at the very least played some hand, in going after Trump. Now, is that true? Who knows? Whether it's true or not here, it is true abroad. And if you were looking at, let's say, some conservative governments, either in Germany, Romania, Fico is a lefty, but still, he would probably fit under this kind of populist mantle. Hungarian, Viktor Orban, or Marie Le Pen. And you see the levels and extent to what those countries do to keep those people out of office. And you find out more and more that USAID and other NGOs, National Endowment for Democracy being another one, work in those countries to undermine those governments. Okay, then what does Trump to do with that? When he looks out at the world and the international order and he wants to reshape international order, and he sees that in some of these countries he's going to have allies in Europe. Okay, well, you want your allies to win. You want your allies to be in positions of authority for you to exert some level of influence around the globe, as opposed to having to work through a European liberal order that claims to believe, liberal claims to believe in democracies, claims to believe in all of this stuff, but when it comes down to it, will go after free media, would undercut the legitimate elections of in countries. Looking at you, Romania, looking at you, Georgia, where they tried to overthrow the Georgian government, looking at you in regards to what they're doing in Slovakia, or for that matter, against Orban. Meaning this is state money, our money, going to undermine these governments under some notion of a liberal order. Okay, Trump looks at this like, okay, I'm tired of this. I don't like this. You tried to do this to me. I want allies abroad. This ends. This ends. I guess I'm trying to point out that from his point of view, he seems to be less enthused, less enamored, less slavishly devoted to intelligence state, at least in the way that the state currently works. And because of that, he has less of an issue in releasing these documents in a way that a Democrat would have, despite the fact that it was a Democrat, John F. Kennedy, that was killed. It's just wild. Just wild. I'm just fascinated by it. We'll see, again, whether this turns out to better or worse. But it is fascinating. Adding to that, in regards to this notion of testing presidential power, when Donald Trump came in, he made these sweeping changes and adjustments in regards to domestic policy. And one of those things was to effectively freeze funding for many of the organizations that operate in the U.S. government. That also included funding for Joe Biden's Build Back Better plan, that included funding for things like the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, USAID, but there were other agencies that Donald Trump effectively killed or eliminated-ish by ending and putting a freeze on federal funding. All right. A judge comes out, because this is being tested all across the United States, it says, well, stop. You can't do that. You don't have the power to do that as president. You need to stop. There's a freeze. And something needs to be done in regards to some kind of evaluation on whether or not this is legal. This is legit. The judge involved in this points out that Trump is blowing off his ruling. So right here, a federal judge said that President Donald Trump violated the order to lift the blanket freeze on federal spending and again directed the administration to release the funds. This comes as prosecutors in nearly half of the country sued the administration for withholding medical research funding. White House correspondent Laura blah, 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 right here. Today, a federal judge said that President Donald Trump violated his order to lift a blanket freeze on federal spending and again directed the administration to release the funds. That is top prosecutor in nearly half of the country just won a temporary legal victory restoring medical research funding that was stripped last week. White House correspondent, right here, let's jump. It says, on the sweeping freeze of federal funding, District Judge John McConnell said in a ruling today that Trump administration continued freeze of those funds, quote, violate the plain text of an order, unquote, that he previously issued, saying that they needed to stop and that they needed to release all of those funds. And Judge McConnell called Donald Trump's actions, quote, likely unconstitutional, unquote, and said that the freeze continues to, quote, cause irreparable harm to quote much of the country. Now, he didn't hold any government officials in contempt, criminal contempt, but hinted that he may if they continue to violate the order. So what are the limits of presidential power? Is being questioned here. And the fact that Trump is like, and by the way, J.D. Vance said this openly, that maybe they should just violate the order. What does it matter? That's disturbing. And this is going to be a test of presidential power. Now, here's the rub. Congress passed that law. So all of these organizations and institutions that he's effectively trying to destroy are part of U.S. law. The same law that allows the president to rule, meaning if you blow off, you can't pick and choose. And I know presidents do. But there are limits, maybe, to presidents picking and choosing like this. The second part to this is Congress. Congress passed these laws. So what does Congress have to say about the president allowing these organizations to effectively go belly up without any support? Now, I am not one of those people who believe that this is the last presidential election to ever take place. I think that's nonsense. So what does it mean when a Democratic president comes in and the priorities of the previous president get ignored? And I mean ignored to the point where they just don't fund those entities, don't do whatever the president put into place. What does that mean? We're in a weird spot as Americans. It is very bizarre to have a situation where the American public elects one person to go and do a job. And you know the person is going to do stuff that's not part of that job. Okay, fair enough. Next president comes in. And the response is, I'm just going to fundamentally ignore everything that the previous president did. Not just ignore it. I'm going to scrub it from the records. I want these policies gone. Now, the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau was made under Obama. So this is not even just a Joe Biden rubbing away thing. He is doing this across the board in breach of the judge's ruling. And Congress has yet to say anything about the fact that the president is ignoring congressional law, things that Congress itself had voted on and passed. They are ignoring it. Now, this goes back to the original conversation I had with Tulsi Gabbard being passed, basically being passed through for the director of national intelligence. There were Republicans that had issues with Tulsi Gabbard. Those Republicans piped down, and those Republicans voted for Gabbard to go through. So when we're talking about presidential power, it doesn't just extend to this idea of getting somebody confirmed. It seems to also go to this notion of whether or not Donald Trump is going to be able to blow off court order, what the court is going to do if he continues to blow off court order, and whether Congress is just going to stand aside as the president fundamentally ignores laws that the same Congress passed. Because that seems to be what is occurring right now. Trump seems to be blowing off law. The judge points out that he's blowing off the law, and the law continues to be blown off. What is the courts going to do? Will they hold someone in criminal contempt? Will they put people in jail? The judge doesn't seem to be there yet, but is at the very least leaving it open. And I would imagine the judge feels some kind of way, questioning her own power in this context, or his own power in this context. Meaning, yeah, you're a federal judge. And yeah, under normal circumstances, when you make a ruling like this, you would expect that ruling to be honored. But as a judge, you're also stuck with this idea of, what if I go further? What if I hold someone in criminal contempt? Then what? Will the person be arrested? What happens if the person is not arrested? All of these, we're in a weird space. I just said that way. We're in a very weird space. And before I get to my guest, who's going to be joining us at 9 o'clock, I definitely want to hit this story. Mark, yesterday, him and I had this conversation about the ethnic cleansing taking place in Gaza. And for anybody who is a Trump supporter, who is saying, well, wait a minute, why are you calling it ethnic cleansing? Okay, well, don't take my word for it. Take Trump's word for it. All right, here. In an interview Donald Trump had, I don't know who this interview was with, But Trump says the quiet part out loud. There's no more discussion about whether or not this is ethnic cleansing. It is literally ethnic cleansing. This is Trump.
Where they are, where all of this stained people will build beautiful communities for the 1.9 million people. We'll build beautiful communities, safe communities. Could be 5, 6, could be 2, but we'll build safe communities a little bit away from where they are, where all of this danger is. In the meantime, I would own this. Think of it as a real estate development for the future. It would be a beautiful piece of land.
Would the Palestinians
no
have the
big
right
money
to return?
spent. No, they wouldn't, because they're going to have much better housing, much better. In other words, I'm talking about building.
Will the Palestinians have the right to return? No. He said no. Quiet part out loud. Will the Palestinians, who you are talking about forcibly removing into Jordan or into Egypt, after you build your big, beautiful properties, after, you make your great skyline, your waterway, your New Monica, or whatever they call it, will the people who live there be able to come back? Trump's answer, no. It doesn't matter what comes after that. His answer was no. So you are removing millions of people in Gaza and the West Bank, forcibly so, because it would have to be forcibly so, because they're not leaving on their own volition. And you are now saying, after we move them out, they will not be able to come back. That is called, by definition, ethnic cleansing. You are cleaning an area of a particular ethnicity, in this case, the Palestinian population that lives there, and you're doing so on behalf of Israel. Call it what it is. Call it what it is. And again, just to play it, don't take my word for it, Brett Baer asks the operative question, will the people who you are forcibly removing be able to come back to their territory after you build your big, beautiful properties?
We'll build beautiful communities for the 1.9 million people. We'll build beautiful communities, safe communities. Could be 5, 6, could be 2, but we'll build safe communities a little bit away from where they are, where all of this danger is. In the meantime, I would own this. Think of it as a real estate development for the future. It would be a beautiful piece of land.
Would the Palestinians
no
have the
big
right
money
to return?
spent. No, they wouldn't, because they're going to have much better housing, much better. In other words, I'm talking about.
Understand Trump's argument. And there's a logic of putting it in these kind of humanitarian terms, right? Well, everything has been destroyed. There's nothing there for them to go to anyway. So why would they want to stay in these horrible, dilapidated conditions when 80 to 90% of the buildings have just been fundamentally turned to glass? Why would they want to go back to that? It's heartfelt. It's humanitarian, right? We care about the plight of the Palestinians. The position that they're in is so outrageous. And because it's so outrageous, I have an idea. Why don't we just move everybody out and move them elsewhere? We could put them in Egypt. We could put them in Jordan. There's already 60% of the people in Jordan Palestinians. This is great. Zero issue with this. That's his argument. So if you're talking to somebody who is just rando on the street, they would say, well, what's wrong with that argument? They are living in dilapidated conditions in this point. Israel has destroyed the hospitals and the territories, especially in northern Gaza. All of that is true. So how is it a bad thing? They don't want to go. You're moving and forcibly removing a community and a population under a guise of humanitarianism, when the people who you are effectively working with and giving bombs to is creating a humanitarian crisis in the first place. You are creating a disaster. And on top of creating a disaster, saying, well, the solution to this is to just forcibly remove the entire population out of the way and let Israel effectively take the territory. We'll find stuff and places for these millions of refugees. But we're going to build this up. It's going to look great. I'm going to own it. We may sell parts of it off to other Arab leaders. This is going to be a fantastic plan, and we love the Palestinian population, and we're doing it for the Palestinian population. That's his argument. This, by the way, was exactly what Joe Biden wanted to do. And there's a question of, okay, well, is Trump fulfilling or as a stronger Joe Biden than what Joe Biden was. Whereas Joe Biden wasn't willing to go to certain lengths, at the very least not in the open, Trump is. For example, this. This is exactly what Mark said yesterday. Trump says he could cut aid to Jordan and Egypt over Gaza development plan. Effectively, either you take the population in the way that I want you to take the population in, and you shut up about it, or the aid that you get from us, it's going to go away. Is this enough in order to get these populations to effectively do something that they themselves believe is clearly not in their own best interest as countries to do? We will find out. Mark seems to believe that the answer is yes. That for all of the bellyaching that Jordan and Egypt may make in the open, in reality that they are, what do you call them, quislings. They are effectively vassals of the U.S. government. And we do, as the U.S. government tells them to do, if the U.S. government puts pressure on them to do so. Now, if you remember, the money that Donald Trump froze did not include Egypt and Israel. Those were the two that were spared from any kind of spending freeze from the U.S. government. So Egypt continues to get taxpayer revenue, and will threats to that taxpayer revenue get Egypt to fall in line? That is the question. That is the question. The U.S. believes that the answer is yes, or the very least Mark believes the answer is yes. Trump believes that the answer is yes. And Trump is even going forward with conversations to these governments in the Arab community about folding over on this very specific front. Now, there's a secondary question to all of this, that even if Egypt and Jordan says yes, how do you do it? How do you do that? How's it not chaos? Now, as Mark puts it, the Israeli military has been force marching millions of Palestinians for the last year, where you would get 1.5 million people and move them to a tiny area. And from Mark's point is, well, they would do the same thing this time around. It would be the same force march, this killing and bombing anything in a particular area in order to force people out that area into a different location, to starve anything that is in that area, to force people out into a particular location, and to do so all the way to the border of Egypt and into Egypt proper. That is going to be gruesome, to put it mildly. Completely and utterly and entirely gruesome. But this entire conflict for the last year has been gruesome. We're talking about 100,000 people being slaughtered. And even if you're looking at just the documented number of people, you're still talking about 40, 50,000 people, 2/3 of which are women and children. So is gruesomeness enough to prevent this outcome? No. Let's be honest. No, it's not. It's been gruesome the entire way through. So no, gruesomeness is not the backstop to this eventuality taking place. And more to the point, Trump seems to be thoroughly enthused about this particular plan, and it's going to give Netanyahu any and everything he wants to create this greater Israel from the river to the sea. Meaning, even if it destabilizes Jordan, Israel does not care. And I wager to you, Trump does not care. Even if it destabilizes Egypt to some level, Israel does not care. Trump does not care. So is there a downside to this from the Trump's point of view? The American public doesn't seem to care. Israel, who's given Trump all of this money through their proxies, loves it. Trump has just given them all of these bombs. Trump has just gotten them their hostages back. So all of this stuff is effectively playing out at once. We'll see. I mean, this is really going to be one of those things of reality asserting itself, whether or not they're going to be able to pull this off, and whether or not Trump has the leverage that he thinks he has in order to make this work. I would give it to him that he does have leverage in many of these fights that he's getting involved in. But there is something to say about getting involved in too many fights at once, simultaneously, which is effectively what he is doing. I mean, he's in a pissing match with the world at this point, especially in regards to Europe, and especially in regards to, in this case, the Middle East. We'll see what happens. I'm fascinated by it. When I point out that he is testing presidential power, I mean it. The other thing, an issue that's dropping at this moment, meaning you make a quote unquote ceasefire. And everybody had qualms with that ceasefire because it felt like it wasn't going to be a real ceasefire. I mean, yeah, you've got Netanyahu to agree to something that he blew off months ago, but now the other shoe drops where you realize, okay, he's trying to forcibly expel the entire population. He just wanted the hostages back before doing so. So now that you say, okay, we want our hostages back, we get the majority of our hostages back. Now it's, oh, by the way, we're going to ethnically cleanse all of these areas. Just so you know. Hamas points out, wait a minute, that is not what we agreed upon. And not just not what we agreed upon, Israel is now fulfilling the obligations of the ceasefire. All right. Trump, just like other American presidents, not an honest actor on this, comes out, doesn't care that Israel is not fulfilling the obligations of the ceasefire. In fact, the expectation probably was that they were never going to be honored in real terms. Because after all, the plan was to forcibly evacuate the entirety of the population. So why would you need to honor a ceasefire if that is going to be your ultimate goal, to ethnically cleanse the area? We're going to solve the issue by expelling the entirety of the population. Now, I have pointed this out once before because on my radio position, I've had the opportunity to have interviews with people from Israel or who are advocates for Israel. And I would ask them, okay, well, what is your outcome, right? You don't believe in a two-state solution. You don't believe in a one-state solution. And you have all of these people there. Okay, well, obviously, you have two outs. We need to kill everybody, meaning we need to murder 1.4 million people and just take it all. Or we need to expel all of these people from the area. Those are your only two outs. They've seemed to come up with a choice of a little bit of both, killing and expelling. Trump, when confronted with Hamas saying, we're not going to release these hostages anymore because Israel is not attending to the deal, Trump comes out and says this.
Well, I would say this, and I'm going to let that be because that's Israel's decision. But as far as I'm concerned, if all of the hostages aren't returned by Saturday at 12 o'clock, I think it's an appropriate time. I would say cancel it and all bets are off and let hell break out. I'd say they ought to be returned by 12 o'clock on Saturday, and if they're not returned, all of them, not in drips and drabs, not 2 and 1 and 3 and 4 and 2. Saturday at 12 o'clock, and after that, I would say all hell is going to break out. Well, I would.
All hell is going to break out. And let's be very clear, this is after Trump has been delivering, 2,000-pound bombs, all of these missiles, replenishing the Israeli military. So the ceasefire just seemed to be a ploy in order to allow Israel to refill its armaments in order for this push of evacuation, this kind of push of the Palestinian solution, that Palestinian solution being to expel, put people, I don't know how they're going to do it, on trains, buses, or have those people force march out of the area. Final solution for the Palestinian population. What would the rest of the Muslim community do? What are they going to do? They've stood by and watched these people get slaughtered for the past year. And now, Turkey, Saudi Arabia, after watching all of these people get slaughtered for over a year, are now like, whoa, we don't like this. This is not in the car. This is not something that we want to see take place. This is not something we want to see happen. Okay. But they said that all the way through, and they've done nothing about it. So it's like, okay, yeah, you are complaining in the same way that you've complained over the course of the last year. Fair enough. That sounds great. Trump is still going to push through and push forward with what he wants to do on this issue. And Hamas, from their point of view, well, wait a minute. If you're going to ethnically cleanse the area, then why are we giving you the hostages? It's that, right? That's the scale. That was the point. Hey, let's have the ceasefire. Let's exchange these hostages. But at no point was there this notion that you couldn't resume attacks, resume fighting. And in this case, the fighting seems that it's going to resume. And it's going to resume for the very specific reason that Trump is trying to ethnically cleanse the area. Just astonishing. And his take is, effectively, all hell is going to break loose with the bombs that I have delivered, that he himself gave over currently. What's wild about this is when this first came out that Trump was able to get a ceasefire and was able to push the Netanyahu government into doing it, either with a carrot or a stick, and I suppose that was the way he did it, or he was just completely obsequious, which he probably was. And there's this question about the Biden administration, because it was clear as day that the Netanyahu government seemed to be doing any and everything to emasculate Joe Biden. And Joe Biden sat there and allowed him to do it over and over and over again. A U.S. president who was paying for 70% of all of the killing that was taking place in that region was effectively told, no. Effectively told, no. Thank you for the weapons. Thank you for the bullets. Thank you for the guns. Thank you for the intelligence. Thank you for the assets that you have on the ground. We appreciate all of that. What are you asking me for? No. Just no. And being perfectly confident that the president of the U.S., who's giving all of this stuff, including diplomatic protection, had no recourse to do anything about it. That is astonishing. It's more astonishing when you accept that Netanyahu preferred Trump being in that office. Now, whether Netanyahu understood the lengths, the obsequiousness that Trump was going to show in lieu of the money that he was getting from Israeli sources, who knows? Who knows? He might have been just happy with the West Bank. Trump seems to be giving it all away. And again, this goes to the notion of, does the president have the power to do this? It doesn't seem to matter whether or not power is taken, not necessarily given. And in this very specific case, he's taken it. He's going to have a compliant Congress. And on top of having a compliant Congress, he's going to have an Israeli military that is perfectly willing to kill, maim, shoot, starve whoever's in their way to accomplish that objective. Just outright astonishing. Outright astonishing. We are going to see the limits of presidential power. And I think that's what we are viewing. And right now, there's a compliant Congress. And so that compliant Congress has effectively allowed the president to do whatever he wanted. Are there limits to that? That is going to be the part that we're going to find out. And we're going to find it out together. But I want to get to my guests. I am joined by the one and only Ted Rall. Ted Rall is a political cartoonist, syndicated columnist, and good friend of the show. You can also find Ted from 10 to 12 on TMI, Too Much Information, with the one and only, the great Manila Chan. My man, how you doing, Ted? You doing okay?
I'm okay. How are you doing, Jamal?
I'm doing all right. I can't complain. I am, I'm alive. I'm awake. And I'll go with that as being a positive.
For sure.
Ted,
Beats the alternative.
Right, I know, right? That's what, when people ask me, they're like, wow, you seem to be handling X or Y well. It's like, what's the alternative? What do you do? I got to hit the story first. So, Hakeem Jeffries, ostensibly the leader of the Democratic Party, right? I mean, he's, at the very least, Speaker of the House. Mama Bear stepped down. A lot of people believe that Mama Bear is still wielding a lot of power behind the scenes. I am one of those people that believe that, by the way. I don't believe that after 20-something years that Pelosi all of a sudden just gave up the reins completely. But whatever. Hakeem Jeffries, he's the standard bearer for the Democratic Party right now. He came out with this, I said this yesterday, he's getting a bit of heat for this. And I want to get your take on it before I say anything. And by the way, I'm using this as a conversation, less of an interview. I'm trying to see what I'm doing.
What leverage do we have?
Secondary to the point. This is Jeffries. Give me your take on this.
I'm trying to figure out what leverage we actually have. What leverage do we have? They control the House, the Senate, and the presidency. It's their government. What leverage do we have?
What leverage do we have? Now, I get you having this conversation behind the scenes, right? Like if you and the other Democrats are sitting in a room and you're trying to figure out, okay, what do we do? What do we do? How do we deal with this situation? This is a crisis. They've taken over everything. They're shutting down our companies, our organizations. What do we do? I get that conversation behind the scenes of, well, what leverage do we have in this process? Usually, though, you come out and you puff your chest, whether you have leverage or not. We're going to do this. We believe in this. And the Democratic Party is going to say, that's not where he is. He is effectively a broken man ahead of a broken party, coming out saying the quiet part out loud of, what do you expect us to do? We don't have any power in this process. We can't do anything. They own it all. They've taken it all. What do we do? What do we do? Now, just to make a point, when Donald Trump won the first time around, that was not Pelosi's point of view, nor was it the Democratic Party's point of view. They were still in this mindset of, we are at war, and we are going to fight every confirmation hearing. We're going to fight everything. That is not where they are today. This is a broken party. And they are exuding the energy of a broken party, represented by Hakeem Jeffries in that statement of, what do you want us to do? They own it all. I'm fascinated by that. Give me your take on that. You've watched politics forever, and you have this kind of encyclopedic memory of all of these eras and epochs in our political history in this country. So I am definitely into your take on this.
Well, Jamal, I mean, I do have a long memory, maybe more than most just ordinary voters, but I don't think you have to have a very long memory to remember like what the Republicans do when they're in the minority and they have to deal with a Democratic, trifecta. Barack Obama, 2008, when he came in, he had a supermajority in the United States Senate for a hot second, granted, but he did have it. He certainly enjoyed a majority in the Senate and in the House for the first, for his first term. And what did Mitch McConnell famously said?
Wait. Ted, give me 1 second. I'm sorry. I made a mistake. I'm going to let you pick up right where you left off. Please continue. I'm sorry.
Okay, so, what did Mitch McConnell say famously in 2009 and 2010? He said, my number one job of the Republican Party is to make sure Barack Obama is a one-term president, make sure he fails on everything. He said it again after they failed to do that and Romney lost. In 2014, they said, okay, we're still not going to let him have anything he wants, right? He won't have his nominees, and we will not let him get anything through Congress. And for the most part, they succeeded. The Republicans obstruct. And, I remember hearing, liberals and Democrats complain about it at the time. And I defended Republicans. I said, they are doing what a minority party is supposed to do.
Right.
The system is set up to allow this. Minority. So it's like, even though if you have 50.1% of the vote, doesn't mean you get to run roughshod over the 49.9% who didn't vote for you. So or let's say it's 60-40, those 40% still have minority rights. And right. So that's what Democrats ought to do when they find themselves in this exact position. And I mean, so people have a long enough memory to remember what Republicans did in terms of obstructionism to Biden, and before that to Obama. And, I guess I would have said Bill Clinton, except that he was basically a Republican. So it's, so the, it's ridiculous. I think Hakeem Jeffries is overestimating the ignorance and the memory, and underestimating the memory of the American people. This is absurd. There's lots of stuff that they can do. There's all the times the Republicans tried to shut down the government, or refuse to raise the debt ceiling, or refused to pass a federal budget to keep the government open. Democrats can do that when they're in the minority. No muss, no fuss. Democrats can also they can block nominations. Any single senator can put a hold on a nomination, and it won't go through. Any single senator, right? I mean, so like, I'll tell you what is not something Democrats have to do. Vote 99-0 unanimously, the entire U.S. Senate for Marco Rubio for Secretary of State. Right. They don't have to do that. Maureen Dowd, who, whenever she comes up from the bottom of her glass of gin, has something clever to say. She said that, she's a couple days ago, she said, this wasn't actually her. This was on the media, Brooke Gladstone. She said the Democrats are hoarding their no votes like precious jewels.
They're hoarding their no votes. What? Withholding your no votes.
So I mean, like, that's awesome. It's something Maureen Dowd might have said. But I want to give credit where it's due. Anyway, the point is, they're not, it's like, sorry, you can obstruct. And so, like, look, there's one thing, there's definitely the jujitsu approach to politics. Let them have their way. Then the American people will see what assholes they are, and then they'll turn on them. I mean, one thing you can count on about Donald Trump is that he will overreach. Fair. But then the problem with that is, I still get letters. My mom died 4 years ago. I still get her mail, right? Mm-hmm. And she was an avid Democrat, a big donor. So I'm always getting these, like, things from the DNC, send us money, right? And, like, they always say, like, donate money so we can fight back, so we can fight Trump, so we can fight. And I'm like, okay, so you can't do the jujitsu soft pillow thing and say raise money by claiming you're fighting. Those two things don't go together. Either you're the soft pillow and you just let yourself get beaten up over and over until, like, your rival breaks his fingers on your face, or you come out fighting a party of fighters. You got to choose. You can't do both. And, like, the Democratic Party has clearly chosen to do neither, right? They're kind of like, they're not, like, really, like, announcing, elections have consequences. The American people have chosen this. We're going to take our toys and go back to our own yard. They're not saying that. They're not also, and they're also saying, like, but they're also saying, like, well, there's nothing we can do. The American people know that's not true. We know you guys can, like, you can block in the Senate, you can filibuster, you can be a giant pain in the ass and gum up all things Trump if you want, and you can take your case directly to the American people and call for them to raise hell and lead them in protests and stuff in the streets and so on. They're not doing any of that. It's ridiculous.
So the question, I guess, the question is, why not?
Party. They're like a wuss party.
I consider it a broken party. I guess the reason why I said broken is because they didn't do that last time. Like, meaning them losing, their response wasn't, all right, elections have consequences. We're taking our ball and go home. We're just going to wait until. They didn't do that. Their response was, they were just complete.
We're going to impeach him. We're going to do
everything in our power. Investigations. We're going to go after everybody that he puts up, either for the Supreme Court or for his typical nominations. They did any and everything in their power to go after him the first time around, even to the point of saying he didn't get elected on his own steam. It was the Russians that got him in office. Even that, like, meaning that wasn't even an attack in the, let's say, the legal space. That was an attack on this, even the very notion of legitimacy of Donald Trump winning that election. That is not where they are. So I guess my point is, obviously, they have the capacity to do it, as you pointed out. They could have came out here and puffed up their chests. They could have been like, we're going to aggressively pursue whatever. And maybe therein lies the problem. What are they pursuing? It's one thing to be in opposition to just being opposition to Trump. Okay, but that failed. That was litigated over the course of the last election. That didn't work. So then they're stuck in the space, I think, of, okay, well, what are we if we're not just purely reflexive against Trump? Like, meaning, I guess the way I'm trying to explain this, and the way I frame it, they set themselves over the course of the last, let's say, 4 years to be this party that is not a thing unto itself, but is purely and entirely reactive to whatever Donald Trump is. So they're relative. They're not, it's not like I would say, for example, I believe in healthcare, education. When people get old, they need to be taken care of by the state, considering they invested all of their energies into that state over the course of their lifetimes. These are value set. The value set doesn't change, whether it's Trump or whether it's somebody else. I'm sick of these wars. I want these wars to stop. That's value set. And so when I'm looking at events in the world, I'm making an assessment of, okay, do I like this or do I not like this? Based on the value set that just kind of is what it is. It is. I am what my mama made me, in that sense. That's not them. And maybe that's the problem. Like, it's not a situation where they're coming away from this saying, all right, we need to harden our beliefs in regards to what we are. We're still going to stand by this, but maybe we're doing. It's not that. I think because they've been so relative to Trump that they have no idea what they are when they've lost on a massive effing level in this way. And so Jeffries, who can't articulate what it means to be a Democrat, I would wager to you, not in real honest terms, comes out and says the quiet part out loud. We've been a beaten party. We have nothing. I have no idea what to do now at this
What can
moment.
we do? What
What
can we
can we
do?
do?
I mean, what's
Everything.
funny is, right? I mean, Jamal, if I know, I have a pretty good sense if for some strange circumstance, tomorrow morning I wake up and it's like, and President-elect Jamal Thomas is about to take office, I have a pretty good idea of some of the things that if my friends were like, oh, you know, JT, like, what do you think he's going to do?
Right.
I think I get 90% of it right. And I think if same thing, you know, vice versa, you could probably say the same thing about me, right?
Yeah.
Okay, but we don't know what would happen if space aliens snap their three fingers and somehow, like, I don't know, President Harris suddenly materializes, right? Or whoever, President Klobuchar, President Booker. We don't know. We really, Jeffries, we don't know. That goes to your point, right? Completely. I don't know if, let's say, Democrats woke up with a 64 vote majority in the Senate, control of the House and the Supreme Court. I don't know what their legislative priorities would be. I don't know.
I would say they don't either. Yeah. And I think there lies the rub. And, you know, for all of this talk about Jeffries, what I would have preferred in that moment is, I know I keep saying this because I think it's true, a contract with America. And I don't mean it in the, you know, in the what is his name, Newt Gingrich way. I mean it in the context of a left agenda for America. And to be like, this is what we are. This is what we stand for. This is what we're going to fight for. And if Trump meets us on some level on this, great. If he don't, we'll fight him on it. That's not really what they're doing, though. And to your point, it sounds like we're going to wait for Trump to make a mistake. The American public chose him. They chose him overwhelmingly. Okay, fair enough. But we are going to wait for oversteps. Oh, that sucks. Because that means we're not changing anything in regards to going forward. We don't even know what to do to go forward. So what we're going to do is we are going to stay what we are, and we're going to wait for mistakes. That is the worst outcome.
Not a loyal opposition. You know, I mean, here, I'm going to take a cue from the Taliban, of all people, right? So for 20 years, the Taliban were out of power, right? Technically, although they controlled the countryside in Afghanistan. But in every single province, you know, there was, of course, an official government, governor, you know, mayor for each city and so on, you know, minister of this, minister of that, you know, judges, you know, etc. But in every province in Afghanistan, the Taliban had the shadow equivalent of every one with business cards and their own personal phone numbers. And like literally they were like the shadow government. So not only did you know if you lived in like Nangarhar province, like if the Taliban come to power, you know, Abdul here is going to be the new judge. I know him. And also Abdul sometimes would be like, you know, we're going to get, you know, the central government in Kabul, they're worthless. The Karzai government, we're going to go talk to Abdul and maybe he can settle this for us. So they would literally they're behaving like, you know what, when you choose the Taliban, you know who and what you're getting granularly. That's just not true about the Democratic Party. Like, you know, I mean, look at Harris. She campaigned primarily, and I don't know if she was told to do this. One interesting tick that I've taken from the new Trump administration is he's picked up on something that Biden used to do, which is he said, oh, I'm not supposed to talk about that, or I probably shouldn't say that. And it's like, he's like, you know, like, but the deep state's not a real thing. You know, so it's just like, so that's maybe, you know, obviously, you know, DNC is like, maybe she was like behind the scenes furious and said she had all sorts of ideas. And I mean, I'm not even being sarcastic.
Man.
I doubt it, but it's possible that they told her that. But it doesn't matter, right? The point is that the party told her to do that. She agreed to do it. She did it. And she just basically didn't articulate anything other than, you know, we're here to protect, save democracy. Here's the thing also. They ran and they said, basically, this is the rise of Adolf Hitler. It's 1933. Fascism is coming. He's a fascist. That's a quote from her. Yes, you know, he's a fascist. So now fascism is here. It's 1933. If we're in Germany in this example, you know, and we're like the Social Democratic or the party or the Communist Party of Germany, and we warned you that Hitler was coming to power. But I will say this for the SPD and the KPD in Germany in 1933, as long as the Reichstag lasted, they did not vote for Nazi stuff. They had their own, they voted against it, and a bunch of their deputies went to, they went to Buchenwald first. They were among the first prisoners in a concentration camp in Germany. They resisted. Okay, this is not you. They just teed it up like this guy. Okay, this is Hitler. So should we give Hitler his Secretary of State? I mean, I don't think we should give Hitler his Secretary of State, but they did. Even Bernie Sanders did. Even Elizabeth Warren did.
They did.
I say Hitler doesn't get his Secretary of State.
At the very least,
At least
if
not
it's
with
Hitler,
not with
and maybe that's the problem, right? Like none of that stuff was serious. Like the idea that you're saying this man is Hitler, this man is a fascist, these people are Nazis, that is so extreme. And when they went there, I was like, oh, they must be losing. Like it's so hyperbolic to say that this guy is Hitler,
right,
while he is simultaneously saying we need to stop these wars.
Right.
Like that's astonishing, right? So maybe like they knew that it wasn't real, and then you lose on that, and then the catch becomes okay. Well, what are you now? You've invested everything in everything that you've had. You invested into this, and it came for naught. What are you now that it's done? I think that's what they're stuck with. Moving on to another story, though. Tulsi Gabbard is going to be approved.
Yep.
I applaud this. Give me your take on this. Tulsi Gabbard's pick for top intelligence official clears the last Senate hurdle. This makes her effectively a shoo-in. Right here, the GOP-controlled Senate on Monday voted to advance the nomination of Tulsi Gabbard to be President Donald Trump's Director of National Intelligence, putting her on the path to be confirmed this week. The party line vote was 54-46, with all Republicans present voting in favor of Gabbard.
Mm-hmm.
What's wild about this to me, and as I was pointing out to the audience earlier today, it's the idea of presidential power. And presidential power in the age of Trump, where he seems to be exerting it, he's the gravity in this moment. And so Republicans, even those who had issues with Gabbard's nomination, because Gabbard, let's be clear, she went there, was like, we are knocking over governments abroad. We are using our assets to put jihadists in positions of authority. Like she said this on the record. I mean, even the chemical weapons thing of, look, they faked this chemical weapons strike in Syria. Tulsi Gabbard put all of that on the record. And you can imagine that many of those congressmen who was there as this was happening, knew this was happening, look at this as like, okay, this is she's saying too much. And even when they were doing the confirmation hearing, some of the issues in the hearing wasn't what she was saying being false. What she was saying was true. They knew it was true. It was the issue that she said it. And that even came up over and over among Democrats of, yeah, I get that. But did you really need to say it? It became that. She's getting confirmed. What does it mean for Donald Trump's power in Congress? Meaning, what does it show in regards to Donald Trump's power in Congress? That even Republicans that had issues with the Gabbard nomination voted ultimately for Gabbard and will vote for RFK Jr. to be confirmed. I'm astonished by it. To me, that shows such power that is being exerted by Trump's office. But give me your take on it.
Well, it's hard to know what kind of phone calls, recalcitrant Republican senators received. I suspect it's a combination of cajoling and bribes and threats, right? So probably there was there's the threat of being primaried. There's also, the cajoling. Like, do you really want to weaken your new president, just days into his second term, and have him, look bad because he loses his nomination? Plus, it'll be, the Democrats who all voted for Marco Rubio, they're voting against her, mostly out of spite because she used to be one of them. Do you want to give them a win? And that's probably powerful in this highly partisan, atmosphere. But also, there's probably like, hey, do you really need maybe you need some more jobs in your district. Maybe you need a dam, or maybe we can do something for you. We can hook you up. What do you need for your vote, right? So I suspect it's that combination. look, the President Trump's never going to be more powerful than he is right now. He's like I've said, used this analogy before. Right now, he's driving the new car off the lot. It's losing value by the second. So he's got to he's got to drive it for all it's worth now, because, in a year, it ain't going to be worth shit. So, the political capital is going to be, people are saying 9 months. I'm like 5. Doesn't matter. You can ask FDR if you can do it, if you need more than 3 months, really. He got almost nothing done in his second term. So, and he's still one of the greats. Trump's power is he understood. Robert Caro wrote the Power Broker about Robert Moses, and the book isn't about Robert Moses. It's about how power is aggregated and applied, and by someone who's knowledgeable. Donald Trump understands power. He understands how to wield it. He understands its importance. He understands that in politics and in finance, it's everything. So that's been his entire life's work. So it's not surprising that he's good at it, and that he surrounded himself after, he had the dry run. The first administration, I'd say, was a bit of a failure, but he learned a lot from that, and he's determined not to repeat those mistakes this time. So the power is extraordinary. I also think it's worth noting that, again, the Democrats come off as spiteful bitches. I mean, the same people who voted for Marco Rubio are like, they're not going to vote for someone whose politics really align much more closely to their purported politics.
Yes.
But I had my problems with Tulsi. I mean, nitpicking's my job. And I used to pick a lot of nits with her particular, I kind of sussed out that the militarism aspect of her personality kind of bugged me. And that's why I never got fully behind her when she was a Democratic presidential candidate. But look, within the constraints of this dying system, Tulsi Gabbard's appointment as a DNI is remarkable. It's a win, and really progressives should view it as about as much of a win as we're going to get in a scenario like this. Also, RFK Jr. RFK's, he's also got it in the bag now. Also, that's remarkable. That's potentially game changing. So I think it's I think it's very clear, like, look, I know you don't like Tulsi because she won't slag Edward Snowden, but sorry, we need your vote on this. We gotta have it. So I think that's what it came down to.
And they got it. For whatever, like you said, arm pulling, cajoling, carrot and stick, whatever they offered, they got those votes. And so Trump is going to get the team that he wanted in order to carry out whatever agenda he's carrying out. Look, I get you with the Tulsi Gabbard thing, right? I guess for me, Tulsi was one of those few people who would go and meet with Bashar al-Assad, who would come back and was like, we're supporting dictators. That was mind-blowing to me. Because, in this media space, oftentimes what you get is this kind of massaged, altered, warped point of view of this stuff. Like, if we're doing it, it's okay. So the fact that we're trying to overthrow a government, we're investing billions of dollars to do it. By definition of us doing it, it is okay that we're effectively doing it. And it's one of those things that nobody ever says. Like, none of these people in Congress ever point out, hey, maybe knocking over governments isn't necessarily to the best interest of America. They don't do that. It doesn't cross their minds. And so the fact that Gabbard is willing to go on air and say, we are investing billions of dollars to overthrow the Syrian government. We are trying to put jihadists in charge. This is not good. And Jake Tapper is like, but the U.S. government says they're not doing that. Jake, I don't care what they're telling you. I went there. I saw it with my own eyes. It is what we're doing. That is an astonishing thing for somebody to say. And more interesting, it just so happened was true. And so, like, the fact that that person who's willing to point out the vagaries of U.S. foreign policy, especially in regards to us knocking over governments that we don't particularly like, created all sorts of chaos in those countries in the region, that is astonishing. And that is, from my point of view, whatever her defects or failures, that is a good thing. So I feel you on that. I didn't support, quasi. When it became clear that she was into these drone wars, she lost me big time. But from the standpoint of this notion of her and the willingness for her to kind of call a spade, oh, I love that. I love
Yeah.
that.
No, it's great.
Yeah. And that is one of those rare qualities. It is a very rare day where somebody like that gets into a position like the director of national intelligence. I guess the catch becomes, what does it mean that she's in that position? And I'll ask you that. What does it mean that she's in that spot? Like, what is like I mean, obviously she's going to be in the president's ear. And obviously Donald Trump put her in that position to be in his ear on issues of national intelligence. I was talking to people about the JFK files, and I'll transition into this story because I'm also fascinated by this one. They found 24,000 new records in the JFK assassination that were hidden from the investigative body that was set up in order to investigate the JFK assassination. So this is 60 years later where they're like, oh, by the way, we found 2,400 additional records on the assassination. I think it was like more than 14,000 pages.
Commission never saw them?
Correct.
Okay.
Correct. I think I said the Church Committee, but yeah, the Warren Commission apparently never saw them. So right here, it said the FBI just discovered. I mean, show it to the audience just so everybody is on the same page. They don't think I'm making this up. Right. This is Axios. The FBI just discovered about 2,400 records tied to U.S. President John F. Kennedy's assassination that were never provided to a board tasked with reviewing and disclosing the documents. Axios has learned. The still secret records were contained in 14,000 pages of documents the FBI found in a review triggered by President Donald Trump's January 23rd executive order demanding the release of all JFK assassination records. That's astonishing. Those records, meaning the body that was supposed to give some analysis on why and how the president of the United States was murdered in broad daylight in front of everyone was not given those records. And so you come to this thing of like, okay, well, wait a minute. If they weren't given all of the records to make a discernment of how he was killed, then how do we know that the conclusion they came up with was correct? I mean, that has to be it, right? And all of the suspicions that were effectively there, I mean, a lot of people didn't believe, myself included, in this magic bullet theory that they tried to effectively put on the American public. And so you go for 60 years of not disclosing documents to the American public while simultaneously telling the American public, oh, look, there's nothing to see here. Trust us. RFK Jr. fully believes that the CIA has something to do with his uncle and dad being murdered. Is it dad? His uncles. Yeah, his uncles being murdered.
Uncle, yeah.
So from his point of view, he's like, yeah, I want these records out. And so part of the deal of him coming on and signing on with Donald Trump was to release the records. Those records need to be exposed to the American public. That is one of the things that I want released, and Trump released them. And now they're finding all of the records were not given to the Warren Commission on the assassination. That is astonishing. I guess my question to you, Ted, is, for one, give me your take on that. But two, why does it take a Republican president to do this?
Well, it took Nixon to go to China, right? It's kind of like that. And man, I just wonder if all of RFK's family, who hates him now for not being a good Democrat and going to work for Trump, how are they going to feel if there's a different conclusion that comes out? Look, I'm not saying there will be. We may end up with the Oswald as a acted alone single narrative. That's probably likelier than not. I mean, having worked done research when I was in college at the National Archives, I mean, one takeaway is, that scene in the at the end of Indiana Jones in the giant warehouse. That really is the way that record keeping is done in the United States government. When an administration comes to an end, the White House and every agency, every department, back then this was all paper files. They literally would just empty all the file cabinets, put all the files into bankers' boxes, tag them, and then send them off to the National Archives. And they'd sit in a big warehouse like that until someone asked to see them. 99.9999% of all these records will never be requested. No one needs to know about Serbo-Croatian language studies from 1962 or whatever. And so they're not asked for. And so now that said, there are certain topics that archivists, historians, investigators, movie makers ask for over and over and over again. Civil War buffs are constantly at the National Archives looking at old Civil War battle plans, and believe it or not, until pretty recently, some of those were still classified. And then, like, in terms of the JFK assassination is obviously one of those subjects. So on the one hand, I'm like, I can easily see how documents would be overlooked because, back then stuff was typically you'd have documents that were carbon papered. So, a memo or whatever would be typed up. There'd be multiple copies made for, 5 pieces of carbon paper, 6 copies. They go to different departments. And sometimes, things would go missing. Something that was at the FBI might have gone vanishing, but there's a carbon of it at Treasury, right? There's a carbon of it at the White House. So stuff, it's easy to see how stuff would go missing, and it's also easy to see how stuff would come back. What's shocking is that given the politics of the Kennedy assassination, and given just how, like you said, it's the assassination. I mean, it's one of the most important political events of American history. This is not something that would have, these 2,400 documents would not have surfaced. And there may not be anything of interest in here, but still, it's like, it's ridiculous that it took all this time. It's ridiculous that it took this unique set of circumstances, of who would have ever predicted if you told me, like, oh, Robert Kennedy's son is going to go work for a right-wing conservative president in the future. Yep. Like, really? I don't see that. And then they're going to get together and he's going to release the documents. What? So it's, it's absurd. It makes you wonder what else is being hidden. But by the way, I'm surprised you're not asking me about Mayor Adams. But anyway.
I am going to ask you about Adams, but one thing before we go to Adams, because that's another case I'm enamored by. Because Adams was kissing some ass in order to get this kind of Justice Department to give him a pass on this, and he started the ass kissing early, by the way. But yes, one last thing: why does it take a Republican to do this? And I'm enamored by that question. Believe it or not, it's a Democratic president that was killed. He was killed in broad daylight. Why does it take a Republican to come in and make this choice? And as I was talking to the audience earlier this morning about it, when people voted for Obama, I remember I had this conversation with a guy, it was a white guy, and he says, I voted for Obama because he was black. And I said, what? What does him being black have to do with your vote? And he says, I thought he was going to change things. Mm-hmm. Like that, by definition of him being different than the other American presidents, that he was going to be this rabble rouser and going in, almost like his physical characteristics of difference was going to be somehow articulated in a physical space, not just this esoteric looking, but actually doing. And he said he didn't get it. He didn't get what he wanted. He got a president who effectively was like every other president that was up there, effectively a manager of the intelligence state.
But in fairness, though, Jamal, I mean, up until Obama, every major national political figure who was black, Jesse Jackson, Al Sharpton, in his pre-MSNBC configuration, all of them, they really were all different. Shirley Chisholm. I mean, it's like I can't even think, Barbara Lee. I mean, they were all different by definition, because they had to be in order to rise that high. Obama was the first, sort of, I wouldn't say post-racial, but he was the first major black political figure where being part of the system was more important to him than whatever racial identity. It just wasn't part of his. It was part of his brand to get elected, but it wasn't part of his brand to govern.
Well, in the way that it was explained, you can be a president that just so happens to be black, but you can't be a black president.
Right.
Which, again, fair enough. It's not so much that I think the guy believed that Obama was going to do all this racial stuff. I think it was more so in the way that he thought he was going to govern, that he was going to be less, let's say, beholden to the same system
as many of the other.
Exactly. And that wasn't the way it worked. Trump comes in, he believes, and I think he's right, that the intelligence services tried to take him out of office. And in trying to take him out of office, he is far more skeptical of those systems, of those institutions. And it's clear as day that he is. I think it's that. And I guess my thing is, there's no political consequence associated with Donald Trump doing this. The American public wants those records out. They want those records released. They would applaud him for for doing so. And they would have done the same thing for a Democratic president if that Democratic president released those files. So it can't be, oh, the public doesn't want this. It's not that. It has to be something else that is going on behind the scenes that is preventing these records from being released, or at the very least is inhibiting presidents from doing so. Somebody is in their ear that's saying, hey, you don't want to do this. This is a bad idea. And by the way, Pompeo did the same thing to Trump the first time around, because that was something that Trump was supposed to do the first time around, to release the files. And Pompeo effectively told him, don't do it. You don't want to do this. This time around, all bets are off. You tried to take me out of office. You tried to put me in a cage. You tried to say that Putin got me elected. Fair enough. I don't trust you as an institution and an organization. So yeah, I'm releasing these files. I'm releasing these records. It is very strange to me that Trump is behaving in the way they thought Obama was going to behave, in an odd way, in this kind of weird way. Obama was straight and narrow. Donald Trump, far more belligerent. He's testing presidential powers against the courts, and in a foreign policy sense, with this kind of tariff war that he's effectively having against the world. It's very strange. To me, he is trying to reshape global order and domestic order. And he's using, while he's at the zenith of this power of doing so. I was looking at polling on Trump because I was curious on how the American public was seeing the way Trump was behaving. My sense was that the public was okay with it, but I wanted to see if there was any actually data to back that up. There is data. Donald Trump is at the highest of his polling that he apparently has ever been right now. Now, as you mentioned, this is a falling rock, but the rock is at 53%. So 53%, based on the CBS News YouGov poll, found that 53% of U.S. adults or U.S. Americans approve of Donald Trump's overall job in the office so far. Most respondents say they would describe the 78-year-old Trump as effective, focused, tough, competent, and energetic. 37% viewed him as compassionate. Well, yeah, I'm shocked. They got 37%. Who the hell are these people, right? Who the hell is this 37%? Say he's being very compassionate in this moment. Maybe the Gaza thing, if they don't know anything about Gaza, maybe they look at it as like, oh, he's being such a nice humanitarian, forcibly ejecting these people out of the Gaza Strip. Who knows? A large majority, 70%, say they believe Trump is doing what he promised to do. I think he is. I would give him credit for that. Yes. Agreed. The poll released Sunday was based on a survey of 2,175 respondents conducted last week, with a 2.5% margin of error. Give me your take on that poll.
I mean, if you're, I don't think with his diet or his age, he's capable of doing cartwheels, but if he were, he could be, or should be. He'd have reason to be. I mean, you and I both watched this man over the course of the last decade. He had a hard ceiling of 45%.
Yes.
That was it. He was never going to ever. And then,
by the way, even just to interrupt real quick, even in Republican circles, if you remember, Trump wasn't bigfooting the Republican Party the first time he ran. He was getting like 30%, 33%. It was just enough to win because you had 20 other Republicans on stage.
Yeah, exactly. When you're, the rest of the vote was divvied up by so many other. They split up, but if they'd been able to unite their opposition to Trump, that he would not have gotten the nomination, obviously. But yeah, when you had a hard high of ceiling of 45, you get to 53, and he wasn't at 45 much of the time. He was at 38, 40. Yeah. So both he and Biden were always around 40, or high 30s. So yeah, no, I mean he's got to be. And look, I didn't vote for Trump. I'm objective. Look, if I'm a Republican, if I'm a MAGA person, I'm very pleased. I mean, it's there's some, you could nitpick about the order of priorities. There's some things that don't seem to have happened maybe, right now, if I go down the street to try to buy eggs, I have to know someone, it's easier to buy weed. It's that's weird. But I mean, inflation seems like it'll probably be a real challenge for him, and that's one of the main reasons he got elected. Okay, but overall, you're okay, energetic. That's accurate. I mean, the guy's he's gone full spectrum honey badger. The executive orders are flying fast and thick. He's it's all the stuff that we talk about. So yeah, you've got to be pleased. I mean, just think, when's the last time we had a Democrat hit the ground running like this? I mean,
exactly.
Never. FDR. LBJ, maybe FDR. I'll give you that. So, he's extremely impressive. I didn't vote for him. I don't agree with most of what he's doing. I agree with some of what he's doing. I think this isn't, about the JFK files. I don't think this is about him being a Republican. I think this is about him being different and being an outsider. He's basically always felt rejected by the elites here in New York City. Other rich people thought that he was like they called him the small-fingered vulgarian.
Right.
He's always felt that he was treated like shit and like an outsider. So ironically, you have this man with his name on buildings all over the world who's faked it until he made it and now really is a billionaire. And but he's never forgotten the way he was treated, and he's kind of like, well, okay, now I'm the king and I don't owe any of you assholes anything. That's all it boils down to.
Yeah. Let's talk about Mayor Adams. I when I say kissing ass, asses were kissed. Now, Adams, if you think back when all of this started to happen, where there were criminal prosecutions against him, just for the audience, Mayor Adams had a corruption case that was against him. It was even so provocative that you had agents stopping him in order to take his electronic devices. And it was clear that he was going to be prosecuted. They were going after him. Now, Adams has said this was a political prosecution, that this was because he was going after Joe Biden on the issue of immigration. At the very least, this is one of the things Adams pointed out. I was against Joe Biden on his immigration policies, and Joe Biden was coming after me because of that. Now, I think that's nonsense, but whatever. That was the way he cast this. That was the way he spun this, that this was purely political prosecution. And he seemed to be more open to some of the things that Donald Trump was saying, even defending Donald Trump on various platforms. The View was a really good example where, that, like you say, honey badgers hate. God, man, if you could encapsulate the hate that they have of Donald Trump on The View, it like just examine. Like they hate his guts, almost like flesh to bone, from lungs to air. They hate his guts. And so when Adams goes on the show and they're thinking, well, clearly he's going to attack Trump too. When we, prod him a little bit, he defended Trump. He's like, well, they call me a fascist. I don't think he's a fascist. I don't think this stuff is beneficial. Shocked the hell out of all of them on The View. So, but that wasn't the only time when he effectively defended Donald Trump.
And again, here's that race thing too. He's black. Why is he not attacking Trump?
That part too, yeah. And so now Adams, the Justice Department, has just come out effectively saying, we believe that the prosecutions against Adams should stop, which means that the prosecution against Adams are probably going to stop. That's astonishing. Give me your take on this. I wanted to give an overview to the audience just so they could get a little bit of context on why this is such a wild story. Adams is a Democrat. He's mayor of New York City. You would expect that he would toe the Democratic line. He is not. And Adams was willing to point out, hey, man, your immigration policies are a pain in my ass. You're causing me problems. A, you're not giving me money to accommodate all of the immigrants that are coming into the city. And B, your policies are making the issue worse. Joe Biden didn't like hearing this. So when Joe Biden went for the United Nations, he did not stop to talk to Adams at that stop, which showed a breakdown in the relationship between the two. I mean, Adams is head of the largest city, or one of the largest cities in America. Give me your take on this. What's going on with the story? I'm fascinated by this.
Well, first of all, about that little slight, I mean, Joe Biden was a baby. It's like this is the people's business. It's not about your, this is the crisis in New York City in terms of its budgetary crisis and the migrant crisis is real and big. And, you would prefer to see these things handled the way that, say, Obama and, Chris Christie, the governor of New Jersey at the time, were able to completely push partisan politics aside and work on the Superstorm Sandy cleanup effort. And, by all accounts, Christie was very pleased with the response of the federal government and the coordination with Obama. And that's the way these things are supposed to be done. Biden was a child, and it's like, even if he's personally like, fuck that guy, on secret, he's allowed to do that. But like, it's not about him and it's not about Adams. It's about the people of New York City, and it's about a problem that needs to be solved.
Yeah.
And then later you can like slam down the phone and be like, I hate that fucking guy. That's fine. but he doesn't do that. I don't know. So, I mean, what you said is exactly right. The way this we've gotten to this point, he said a lot of nice things about Trump. The most, this all basically came to pass when, he flew down to Mar-a-Lago for a private one-on-one meeting with the Trumpster. Nobody released what they talked about, but it was very clear that the mayor, who's facing serious felony charges, and could go to prison, was down there, begging for a pardon, begging for some kind of relief.
We're begging for a pardon
from Trump. He was. I mean, he wasn't the first or the last. There's a whole parade of people down there looking for that. And I don't even really blame him. What I blame him for is remaining in office. When he faces charges that are directly related to his ability to do his job. I mean,
Right.
It's not like he was charged with DUI, let's say. It's like, well, he could still be mayor, and it's like, okay, I won't drive. Okay, I have a chauffeur. It's like, this is like you were accused of selling, your political influence for bribes. Okay, and everyone around you doing the same thing. It's like, so This is directly about your political corruption. By the way, not like, former Vice President Agnew, who accepted bribes when he was the governor of Maryland, not as vice president, but had to step down anyway. This is not even about something, Mayor Adams did when he was in the police department, right? This is pertinent to his current position, and he's still there. He shouldn't be there. He should have stepped down. But I don't blame him for, given everything else. I don't blame him for, going to look for that. He's not going to be. I would be shocked if he ran for re-election next year. If he does, he will lose badly, because this will all any of his opponents have to say is he went to Trump, sucked up to Trump. Trump got him off the hook. He's corrupt as hell, and every New Yorker will be like, yeah. And New Yorkers have long memories. They punished Michael Bloomberg over something that had happened 4 years earlier. I won't get into all the machinations of when he decided he wanted to get a third term. And New Yorkers were just furious about that. So they held that against him, and so I mean that's how we got De Blasio. Instead of Bloomberg's chosen anointed successor. So New Yorkers will not. I mean, Adams' mayoralty is finished. He hasn't accomplished anything in really at all in 4 years. There's 3 years. There's not much evidence that he tried either.
Yeah.
He doesn't get out much. I mean, and the jokes. I mean, he's a laughingstock. Like literally, like people will just you'll hear people say like, it's 6 o'clock in the morning. Like, the mayor must be just getting home from clubbing.
Oh, that's so wrong. That is so wrong. But it's true. Like, I remember, the videos that I remember him when he first got elected was him dancing in a club. And I'm like, okay,
bad.
I get it's New York. But is this really, I don't want to
At the height
nitpick
of
on
the
that.
pandemic, too.
Yeah. It was just a bad look. And it was that way all the way through.
And no one was more locked down than we were, right? Because, I mean, who lives in the smallest average square footage per home in America? New Yorkers. Okay, like I live in a 1,400 square foot apartment. People walk in and they're like, "Oh my God, your place is huge.
This is a mansion." Yeah.
Yeah. No, I used to live in an 800 square foot apartment, and people would walk in and say, "This place is massive." Okay, that's what New York is like. So, so when we were locked down, we were really locked down. There were people who were in apartments that were 500 square feet, looking out at an air shaft for basically like a year. I mean, we all lost our minds then. And then Adams is like running around, clubbing at that same exact time.
What do you think he had to do to get this pardon? I mean, or to get this grace of the president? Because that's what it is. It's the grace of the president. The president is effectively telling the Justice Department, give the guy a break. And the Justice Department says, okay.
Yeah. Well, what did he have to do? I suspect he probably didn't. I doubt this was a quid pro quo. I don't think Adams really has anything specific to offer Trump. I mean, I guess he certainly could, in his last year in office, sign off on all sorts of things that the Trump organization would like to see happen in terms of business projects. Maybe he just needs one. Maybe that's it. Who knows? Maybe there's. I would suspect at most that's it. I think this is more about Trump views that the advantage to Trump is he gets to be seen as someone who does give grace to a Democrat and a black Democrat. That goes counter to brand for people who say that he's a racist. It also, and I think it also is his way of, the enemy of my enemy is my friend. He was on the outs with Biden and the Biden Democrats and who fucked with me. So, I like him because he's not them. I don't think it's really more complicated than that. It's also like, despite everything, even though he's reinvented himself as a Floridian and to a lesser extent a New Jerseyan, Trump will always be a New Yorker. And he is culturally, he's from here, he's of here, and he cares about what happens here. It's another way of like putting his, controlling the destiny of the future. I mean, who knows?
What about immigration? Like, he seemed to have made immigration a hallmark of his presidency. This was one of the things, like the tip of the spear that he used in his getting elected. I mean, I thought he talked about it too much, but apparently I was wrong. He was able to use it to get elected. New York is one of those sanctuary cities, so is California, that effectively is kind of like a fortress, even in the sense of illegal immigration. Mm-hmm. Is the deal effectively, I will lay off on that issue, that we dovetail on that issue, that for all intents and purposes, this was one of the main things Adams was complaining about, of so much money from New York was going into dealing with the immigration issue. Do they dovetail? Where it's like, okay, I'll get this guy passed because anybody else is not going to allow me to affect my immigration agenda in New York City. Whereas Adams, whose ass I just saved from going to prison, will. Is it that?
Jamal, that's really good. I hadn't thought of that, but yes, you're right.
Well, thank you, Ted. I appreciate that.
Clearly, I think that's right. I think that probably was part of the quid pro quo, and we've seen a little bit of signaling. Blink and you'll miss it, where Adams has said that he doesn't feel that the sanctuary city law has been serving the city very well, and that there's flexibility there. This it had bipartisan support for years. I mean, man, there's no city in the country that is more open to immigration than New York culturally.
Right.
And we like it. It's like what makes the city interesting and vibrant. But things have gotten really out of control, and I think even among liberals, maybe they wouldn't admit it in public, but a lot of them wouldn't mind if I guess no one wants to see like little girls and their moms selling candy on the subway, dragged off by ICE goons to Guantanamo.
Of course.
But if it's like some of the gangbangers who've been in the New York Post and on New York Channel 1, yelling insults, smirking at the cops, basically doing whatever they want and punching people in the face randomly. Those people, no one's going to care about. I mean, I care. I don't want them to go. I don't think anyone should get sent to Guantanamo. But I think the truth is, people just will turn a blind eye.
Fascinating. Ted, my man, Ted Raw. He's a political cartoonist, syndicated columnist. Check Ted out 10 to 12 immediately at the ending of the show. He goes on with Manila Chan for TMI. You can get him on YouTube. Too much information. Ted, my man, thank you for this. Always appreciate talking to you. Always enjoy these conversations.
Always so much fun. Anytime.
Have a good one, man. Be safe.
You too.
All right. The next guest is going to be John Kiriakou. He is going to come on and have this conversation about the way USAID is kind of a front for the CIA and how that's been allowed to just overthrow governments. There's no other way to put it. We've effectively used something. It's kind of like the Department of Defense, right? In the old days, it used to be called the Department of War. The Department of War was more honest. It's kind of like that. We call it aid, and we call it USAID, even for National Endowment for Democracy. We are trying to help democracies. Okay, but what does that mean in real terms? In reality-based terms, what does it mean? It means that we're sending money overseas in order to influence media 9 out of 10 media organizations in Ukraine were effectively coming out of the USAID or being funded by USAID. And it's not just there. Romania, Georgia, Hungary, all of these countries and more have received this money for the sole purpose to destabilize those governments that we don't necessarily like, because they don't necessarily toe a liberal agenda in the way that we would consider to be a liberal agenda. And so we have effectively used resources under this guise of aid to overthrow governments. That is, look, I think the wild part about the story is that it's now a story. This has been something that's been going on for decades. And now, with Trump coming in, there seems to be this kind of magnifying tool that's placed on it of, hey, we've been overthrowing governments. Golly gee, look at what has been happening with money coming out of the US government. So, it shouldn't be mind-blowing. And like I said, the mind-blowing part is not so much that we're doing it. The mind-blowing part is that we are now talking about it. It's the talking about it that's fascinating to me more than anything else. This was not necessarily something that we talked about. It was something that everybody knew that no one would say. Now, everybody's saying. Now, let's be very clear, though. They're not getting rid of it. It is just going under the State Department. And this was kind of one of the quotes that Marco Rubio made, effectively saying, we have this rogue money that is being funded by the US government, that is going into other governments, that is not being controlled by the US government. Effectively saying that this policy is being enacted regardless of the president that's in office and regardless of what the president may want or may not want in regards to US policy. It is still acting and functioning almost on its own will as it functions in these various countries. That needs to stop. So it's not so much that it needs to stop in entirety. It's more so, or at the very least, it sounds like Rubio is saying it needs to function in coordination with what U.S. government wants, depending upon who is in power of that government. So if you're going to have somebody like Trump in office, okay, well, they may use it to go after Venezuela. They may do that. By the same token, they may not want it to go after somebody that he will like Orban or Fico, or let's say if one of the governments in France gets in with a Marie Le Pen. It's just fascinating. But I want to go to my man, John Kiriakou, the man of the hour. He is a former CIA spy, whistleblower of that organization. John Kiriakou, definitely check out many of his books. John, where can people find you now, though? You are doing speaking engagements all across Europe. You've got a fantastic opportunity. Where can people find you now? I just want to give a heads up to the audience.
Well, thanks for asking, Jamal. The best place for me is Substack. I'm also active on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram, all under John Kiriakou.
Okay. John, I have to start with USAID. As I was telling the audience, it's not so much that I'm fascinated that USAID was knocking over governments or doing everything in their power to do so. In various countries, 9 out of 10 of the media in Ukraine apparently was coming out of USAID or being paid for it. We found billions that have been put into either Syria, Hungary, Romania, all of these governments that were effectively under pressure because we didn't necessarily like the person who was in office. And we, in our take, wasn't pursuing a liberal agenda. And by liberal agenda, meaning being full-throated for various wars that we were involved in. I am fascinated by the fact that we're talking about it.
Yeah.
This is usually something that you just hear in whispers, not necessarily something that's put on the pages of media and press. And weirdly enough, it is the Democrats that seem to be more aggrieved by the fact that the USAID is on its way out. I'm fascinated by that. Give me your take on how did the CIA manage to use these groups to affect American policy abroad? Because at some point, a choice was made. Oh, yeah, the CIA is still going to operate, but it is far easier to use groups like this to enact that power, to enforce, or let's say to get our power across, as opposed to us being the exact front to doing so. These organizations were being used. Explain how that worked in practice, if you can.
Well, think of it this way. Think of USAID as being something of a propaganda adjunct of the CIA. And I'll tell you, one of the things that's been very interesting to me, Jamal, in this latest go-round with USAID is that none of this information is new. None of it. We've known this for decades. And I'll give you some examples. In 1973, Ted Kennedy wrote a letter to the CIA saying, is it true that you're using USAID to carry out CIA covert operations in Indochina? And much to Ted Kennedy's surprise, he received a response, two responses actually. He received a response from Henry Kissinger, who was the Secretary of State at the time, and from the director of the CIA saying, actually, yes, we are using USAID as a cutout for CIA covert operations, but not just in 1969, which was the year that Kennedy had asked about. They admitted to doing so in Laos in 1969, 1970, 1971, and 1972. That document was declassified and it's freely available on the internet. You could see Kennedy's letter and you could see Kissinger's response and the CIA response. Fast forward many years, George W. Bush is president, and he doesn't like the government of Bolivia. And so he decides to overthrow it. Well, you can't just, flip a switch and overthrow it. You have to propagandize the people of that country.
Right.
And so what does he do? He does that through USAID. And it's like these policymakers, Jamal, it never occurs to them that these documents will eventually be declassified. And these documents are what historians will use to judge the efficacy of our, foreign aid programs that are supposed to be run through USAID. Instead of documenting foreign aid, they're documenting CIA covert action operations. And it wasn't just George W. Bush. Barack Obama allowed USAID to set up a CIA radio station and a social media platform called Zunzunio that was supposed to encourage something akin to an Arab Spring, but in Cuba, to overthrow the Cuban government. It was a miserable failure. And again, those documents were declassified. So this is something that has gone on for decades, and nobody is terribly good at covering it up.
Why do you think it took Trump to do this? Like, why do you think it's Donald Trump being the one saying, I'm tired of USAID. This needs to stop. It needs to stop now. Because what's wild about it, you're getting screams out of Europe saying, oh my God, independent media is being undercut by the US government pulling and freezing USAID, which is an astonishing headline, because it's like, well, wait a minute, how is it independent media if the United States government is putting the bulk of the money behind this quote unquote independent media? It's astonishing. Why does it take a Trump to do this?
That is such a great question. And it is something that I think future PhDs are going to be based on. Here's my own philosophy, and I think I'm right on this. But if you look back at the election, the presidential election of 1932, that is what historians call a watershed election. In that, before 1932, it was the Republicans who were the liberals. It was the Democrats who were the Southern conservatives. But the Democrats nominated Franklin Roosevelt, who was a New York liberal. In fact, he had been the Secretary of the Navy, I think it was, in a Republican administration. In 1932, the two parties switched sides, and the Democrats became the liberals with the creation of the New Deal, and the Republicans became the conservatives. I think we are in the midst of a slow motion watershed change again, where it's not liberals and conservatives flipping, it's statists and populists. And Donald Trump is a populist, and he's causing politics to sort of flip on its head, where you've got working people, union members who've been Democrats for 4 or 5 generations, now flipping and becoming Republicans, and not just Republicans, but Trump Republicans. And as part of this populism, I'm going to call it Trumpism, includes this anti-government, anti-establishment bent that is very appealing to people. Listen, I would venture to say a majority of Americans think that the U.S. Budget deficit is largely due to foreign aid. In fact, foreign aid accounts for 0.1% of the federal budget. It has nothing to do with the federal deficit. But Trump wants people to believe that. And it's a way to cut foreign aid. It's a way to do away with USAID. It's a way to target things like the Broadcasting Board of Governors and the Voice of America and all this other stuff that Democrats have come to love. Also, Trump is confident enough that he believes if there's going to be major change on the international front, it will be by force of his personality. We don't need the likes of USAID to do our dirty work, right? Donald Trump can pick up the phone and call Kim Jong-un and forgive me, he can call Kim Jong-un and he can, ask him to meet, and they can meet in Singapore and they can do whatever they want. So I think we're in the midst of this kind of change.
No, that's fair. I accept that. I guess I looked at it also on some level, the same entities that liberals have used to kind of overthrow governments that Trump may be considered also populist, or at the very least, let's say governments that are more in line with what he wants to do in the world.
Yeah.
That, the money that was invested to get rid of Carl Gorgescu, for example, in the Romanian election. Okay, well, Carl was one of those people saying, we're not going to be involved in this Ukrainian conflict. I don't want to be involved in this. And then you get the court to annul that election.
Mm-hmm.
And on top of annulling that election, you're like, whoa, you guys have just blown off an election. Then you find out here again, we have USAID that was being used to spend money to enforce, or let's say to put out a certain point of view of the world that was going to run contrary to what Gorgescu was going to do. Okay, is that a coincidence? I don't think so. Is Gorgescu somebody who will most likely be able to work with Trump? Yes. Does Europe like him? No.
Absolutely.
And same thing with Orban. The same thing with Fico in Slovakia. The same thing will be true for the French government, whoever, Marie Le Pen ends up picking, if not Marie Le Pen herself in 2027. That's assuming Macron stays the entire time. And the same thing with Germany in the election that's coming up, where you may get the AfD taking prominence in the government coming up. Like, that's astonishing. And so from his point of view, USA will be against all of this stuff. Like, meaning all of these people who he may be able to work with going forward, and who may be against.
Not necessarily, because his opposition and traditional American opposition has been opposed to left-wing populism.
Yes.
Evo Morales, for example. USAID worked hard to overthrow Evo Morales. Yep. The Cuban government, over successive presidencies, 3 that we know of. So I think it's a little bit different, because these guys, the European leaders or would-be leaders that you're talking about, also see themselves as populists in that Trump mold. And I think that he sees, kinship there.
Oh, yeah, exactly. I guess that's my point. Yeah. He sees kinship. And seeing that kinship, USAID was working against all of this element. I agree with you, right? That if we're talking about Bolivia, if we're talking about, let's say, Ecuador, if we're talking about these kind of left-wing governments that are taking hold, let's say in South America, 1,000% agreed. USAID was working hard, even against Venezuela, to get rid of these guys.
Even against Venezuela, yes.
But in Europe, it's different. It's the liberal order that seems to be against what Trump wants to do, not just in Ukraine, but just in general in regards to this kind of what seems to be an acknowledgement and an acceptance by the Trump administration that we're in a multipolar world. And that this idea that we're going to work with Europe in order to be the unipolar power in this world is over with. Okay, well, Europe is not on board for that. They've been crying miserably. In fact, they've been screaming, okay, we are going to try to now maintain the war in Ukraine. Okay, good luck with that. That's not going to happen. But that's where their mindset was. And so you get all of these European leaders who are saying, okay, we're tired of this war. And what happens? All of the pressure in the world are applied to those governments. So that it's applied to the Georgian government. It's applied to the Romanian government. It's applied, well, Germany is a little bit different just because the government collapsed. I guess I'm trying to point out, it seems that people who would be in line with Trump were the ones who were at the edge of USAID. Whereas it's not necessarily something that the liberal order in Europe was okay with. I don't know. I was just fascinated by why it took Trump to be the guy who looked at this and said, this is a problem. We're overthrowing governments. Why are we doing this? It's just fascinating.
When you've got the Democratic nominee for president of the United States, not just pursuing, but then celebrating the endorsement of Dick Cheney, you know that the parties have flipped.
Something's wrong.
Something's just nuts in American politics right now.
How's the CIA looking at Trump's presidency? I know you don't know that. You're not still part of the organization.
Right.
But to get a president who comes in and effectively is like, we are upsetting the apple cart. This is not business as usual in the way that we operate.
I'm of a couple of
is-
minds on this.
Please.
You know, Trump talked big in the first term and then appointed like the two worst possible people that he could have appointed as CIA directors, Mike Pompeo and Gina Haspel. Haspel being the consummate insider, 30 plus years in the agency, and Mike Pompeo being the agency's biggest apologist in years. It's different this time because John Ratcliffe is somebody that Trump can trust. I'm worried about this new deputy director, David Cohen. He's the former general counsel at the Heritage Foundation. That bothers me very much. But I'm not sure that the CIA lifers really care so much because Trump's a lame duck, and he's out in 4 years. He's out, and even if JD Vance replaces him, they could probably deal with JD Vance. He doesn't have any experience at all. He's been in the Senate for what, a minute?
Yeah.
And so I think that the CIA is going to slow roll this president. If he orders something that they don't like, they just move in slow motion. And in 4 short years, he'll be gone and they can deal with whoever comes out of the ashes.
So basically wait him out.
Yeah. And they've done that in the past when there were presidents they didn't like Jimmy Carter, for example, or Bill Clinton. You just move very slowly. Presidents come and go. And these CIA people are there for 25, 30, 35 years. They know that they can outwait whoever happens to be president.
Trump seems to believe, though, that the CIA and let's say the intel, because I'm combining the FBI and the CIA in this, were instrumental in trying to have him removed in this whole Trump and Russia stuff. Meaning he has a skepticism of this intelligence service in a way that is not present in the Democratic Party. And usually it's not even present in presidents in general. Maybe JFK was the last one who had this kind of, I'm going to destroy the CIA and blow it to the wind, that type of stuff, having a church committee to kind of pull out all of the dirty secrets that these guys were effectively out there doing. How do you frame that in regards to how does a president who's skeptical of the intelligence service work with that same intelligence service, which he will have to as he pursues whatever objective he's pursuing?
That's a great question. And, I'm not sure. There have been presidents who, in our lifetime, who have been totally into whatever it is the CIA is doing, and presidents who have kept the CIA at arm's length. As you said, John Kennedy famously said that he wanted to break the CIA into 1,000 pieces and scatter it to the winds. And then he was dead 5 weeks later.
Right.
We've had presidents who have declined their 6-day-a-week CIA briefing, the PDB, the President's Daily Brief. Bill Clinton was president for 8 years and was briefed 3 times.
Wait, why would they decline that?
Not interested. Not interested in anything the CIA is doing. Al Gore was interested, and Al Gore was briefed 6 days a week and then told the CIA that if they could brief him a 7th day, he would take it. But Bill Clinton had zero interest in
wait, you gotta dig into that for me. Why would the president be against getting the briefing from the CIA?
Because it's the economy, stupid, remember? It was all about the economy. He didn't give one whit about foreign policy until he was forced to in Yugoslavia. But he left all that to Al Gore. He had zero interest. Zero. In fact, in his second term, I was still in the Directorate of Intelligence at the time. There had been reporting in the Washington Post that he wasn't receiving a briefing, that he had received one briefing in his entire first term. And so he wrote a letter to the CIA workforce saying that while I'm not being briefed, that is correct, I do read what you write for me. So keep it coming. It's great stuff. I love what you do. I think you're great. That was all nonsense. He didn't give a shit about the CIA.
Wow.
Yeah.
Tell us something that we don't know about the organization that would shock us.
Well, I'm on record over the last 18 years of being something of a CIA dissident.
Yes.
I think the CIA should be broken into 1,000 pieces and scattered to the wind, like John Kennedy said. But one thing that may shock you is that most CIA employees are wickedly smart, dedicated, patriotic, good people who want nothing more than to serve the American people. The shame of the organization is that, just by the nature of its creation, it's an espionage organization.
Right.
Its leadership is not someone I would want in my home or babysitting my children. And since 9/11, it's become a paramilitary organization whose reason for being has morphed from recruiting spies to steal secrets and to analyze those secrets to provide the policymaker with the best informed policy, over to killing the people whose politics we don't like.
Mm-hmm. Do you see that changing anytime soon?
No.
That is just the way they have just fundamentally shifted.
Yeah,
and
they've
changed.
fundamentally shifted. And as I said, presidents come and go, and the CIA is there always. And so they know that there's nothing any president can do to them.
What you're talking about is the deep state.
Yes.
This notion that, it's like, regardless of what the head may be
Yes.
trying to do on the outskirts, at the very end of the day, we are still going to be what we are. We're going to continue these policies as we move forward. Wow. Okay. That's unfortunate. I mean, because you would think that a president that was skeptical of the CIA would have more control over that organization.
You'd think. Now, one thing that Jimmy Carter did, because Jimmy Carter was skeptical of the CIA, Jimmy Carter named Admiral Stansfield Turner as the CIA director. And he didn't have a personal relationship with Turner, but Turner had a reputation in the Navy. And remember, Carter came from the Navy. Turner had a reputation as being Mr. Clean. And so the first thing that Turner did was he just fired en masse, a quarter of the operational workforce. And they called it the Friday Night Massacre. And you hear old timers still at the CIA. I mean, they're retired now, but when I was there, old timers would say, that damn Carter and damn Turner, someday we're going to get revenge against those guys. They fired people who were just weeks short of their pensions. That's not the issue of all, whether somebody was weeks short of his pension. Mm-hmm. The issue is, were those people violating the law? And the answer was yes. And so Carter did something about it. We had just come out of the Church Committee. We had just come out of these mid-1970s reforms, or what were supposed to be reforms of the CIA. In 1977, Carter became president. He said, what happened to these reforms? These were supposed to be enacted a year ago, 2 years ago. And you're telling me the CIA hasn't changed at all? Except maybe, possibly now they're not murdering heads of state? Maybe. So he went in and just fired everybody. My very first briefing as a junior analyst at the CIA was to give a briefing to Stansfield Turner. Retired directors are entitled to on-demand briefings classified up to the secret level. So I had been on the job for maybe 3 months, and Stan Turner was offered 2 free tickets on a cruise in exchange for giving a lecture about the cruise was going through the Persian Gulf, and he had to give a lecture on Gulf pro-democracy movements. So I was excited because this is a former DCI. And my boss, as I was getting ready, I was putting my jacket on to go do the briefing. And my boss stopped me and he said, unclassified only. And I said, why? I said, he's a former DCI. He's entitled to secret. And he said, we don't do anything for Stan Turner. Nothing. Wow. He said, unclassified only. Well, this was what, 11, 12, 13 years after Stan Turner had initiated the Friday Night Massacre. And they were still furious.
Wow, they remembered.
Oh, and I remember people saying, like I said, I briefed Stan Turner today. And one of the other analysts said, he's lucky they even let him onto the compound.
Wow.
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
It was
I
bad.
got to get to Iran before we close. So there's been a lot of reporting, even when Donald Trump first took office, that was putting a lot of chum in the water, I'll say it that way, on this idea that Iran was looking for some kind of secret, special, fast way of creating a nuclear bomb.
Right.
Now, this goes against the fatwa. I think they call it a fatwa against nuclear weapons that was put out by the Ayatollah, effectively saying we don't need these. These are not something that we're looking for. And Iran has said for of decades, we're not looking for a nuclear bomb. We have the technical proficiency to do it, but no, that is not something we're trying to do. And this is after people in Iran are pushing, saying we should be doing this. Israel has a nuclear weapon. Syria has collapsed. Hezbollah has been, if not decapitated, at the very least demolished or undercut severely. We can't continue in the way that we are continuing. We need to have an X factor, that X factor being a nuke. And again, the Iranian government still says, no, we're not doing it. The Ayatollah, no, we're not doing it. So
the CIA National Intelligence Estimate, no, they're not doing it.
Okay, so where is all this chum being dropped into the water? Where is that coming from then? Because all of the news and the reporting has been coming out from the perspective of the West. Again, it's anonymous sources, so you never know who these people are. I remember during the Iraq War where Dick Cheney would go out, give anonymous sources to the New York Times and then reference himself as if it was news, with no one knowing, him being the person who leaked and gave the information to the New York Times. So I'm always skeptical of this, the way that we do media. This source told us this. Okay, well, the government source clearly had a point of view that they want to get across, and they were able to get across anonymously and turn it into a story.
Yeah.
Where is this coming from? And, is this one of those things where this is coming out of the Trump administration itself because they want to have a pressure policy against Iran?
Yes.
And should Iran be looking for the bomb? Meaning, has it been a mistake that they have not been more aggressive in regards to allowing Hezbollah to get decapitated, allowing the events that have been taking place in Gaza without necessarily having a strong response to it, considering they were going to be next. They were always going to be next. Give me your take on this, because the Middle East is in chaos right now.
It is. To answer your second question first, the Iranians have made some critical errors just over the last 6 months. I have used the word decapitated, just like you did a moment ago. Hezbollah has been decapitated. Hassan Nasrallah was killed, and 3 days later, the person who was replacing Hassan Nasrallah was killed. And not only has the leadership been decapitated, but that critical lifeline from Iran through Syria to Lebanon is gone. Al-Qaeda runs Syria now. So there is no more weapons pipeline between Iran and Lebanon. So, yeah, Hezbollah has made terrible, terrible mistakes. To answer your first question, I think all of this is coming from the Trump White House. Donald Trump, we're talking on Tuesday the 11th. On Sunday the 9th, Donald Trump made a statement that he wants to engage the Iranians, and if they don't want to, he will, quote, bomb the hell out of them. No, he's not going to bomb the hell out of them. But this is what he does. You remember in J.R. McMaster's memoir, this was just so great. In J.R. McMaster's memoir, he wrote that when he was Trump's national security advisor, Trump was talking one day about bombing North Korea and possibly about nuking North Korea. And McMaster said he was so appalled that they would even have this discussion that he said, he blurted out, you know how you could really make a name for yourself in history is if you engage the North Koreans, because the Democrats have never had the guts to engage the North Koreans. Well, that had never occurred to Trump. And so that was the first love letter. Remember the love letters that they exchanged? Yeah. That was the first love letter. Next thing you know, they're meeting in Singapore for the very first time. It was the first of 3 summits, and they're talking about a Nobel Peace Prize for Donald Trump and Kim Jong-un. I think we're seeing this repeat itself, but I think this is at Trump's insistence. You remember the old phrase that we all learned in our freshman year political science, or not political science, but international affairs classes, that only Nixon could go to China,
China,
right? Well, maybe only Trump can go to Iran. And maybe that's what we're seeing here, where he's saying, I'm going to bomb them. I'm going to bomb the hell out of them. And thank God that we withdrew from the JCPOA. And then all of a sudden, they're meeting in Doha or they're meeting in Muscat. I think that's the bigger possibility here.
What does Trump want, if that's true? Like, there's all
Honestly,
this talk about a Trump and Putin meeting that's
Yeah.
supposed to take place. I was at the first Biden-Putin summit. I want to put
Yes,
that in.
I remember that.
That was an astonishing event. I was far too hopeful in that event. Mindy was very cynical. It's like, okay, whatever, we're just doing our job. We're here. he took none of it as real. His point of view was, this is all theater.
Yeah.
Nothing is going to come out of this. This is nonsense. And my point of view was, hey, these guys are sounding like one another. Meaning, when Joe Biden came out, Joe Biden did his first 5 minutes of, oh, Vladimir Putin's a horrible man and everything else. And then after that, what he was saying sounded very similar to what Putin was saying when Putin gave his press conference, gave his meeting. And I'm like, well, hey, they're having these back channel communications. At the very least, they seem to be saying a similar thing. Maybe something comes out of this. I was woefully naive. So fair enough. This time around, though, I'm hoping my naivety is not necessarily shown to be naivety and shown to be something that's a little bit more, let's say, solid in regard to this kind of international relations between the United States and Russia. I guess my take is, what do you think Trump wants out of any deal with Iran? They've gotten rid of the JCPOA, so it's not that. So
I think that's exactly what it is. I think that he wants essentially what the JCPOA called for without having Barack Obama's name on it. So the JCPOA, the most important parts of the JCPOA were international inspectors at Iranian nuclear sites and lead seals on the entrances of all of the Iranian nuclear sites. And that is exactly the same thing that we had through the United Nations on Iraq from 1991 to 2003, right? That's what the JCPOA called for. And it was working. It was actually working. What the United Nations does when they set up these international inspections regimes is they install hundreds of security cameras over every site, right? And then they put lead seals on all the door with the United Nations stamp on them, so you can tell if the door has been breached. The Iranians were abiding by the JCPOA, and in exchange, it opened up trade relations, mostly with Western Europe and Japan. We allowed the importation of carpets and pistachios and stupid stuff. The Iranians were far more interested in civilian airplane spare parts and spare parts for to upgrade their refinery industry. But I think what Donald Trump would be happy with is the JCPOA not being called the JCPOA and being called, the Trump agreement or the Trump whatever. I think that's really what he's looking for.
I guess the last question, and it has to do with, how is Iran looking at the world right now?
Yeah.
And is it possible that part of what they are willing to accept is thinking, all right, we have a security agreement with Russia. We're going to get new fighters. We're going to get new armaments. We're going to get new missile defense, meaning it's going to take time, however, for us to get these things. But during the time, we are going to eat crow. Mm-hmm. And if we need to eat crow while we continue to get S-400s, while we get additional missiles, we are going to build up ourselves to be able to stand toe-to-toe with any of these players in this area. However, we can't do it now. And much of the power base that we have effectively used as our proxies have been eliminated. Mm-hmm. So we're in a rebuilding phase. And Pezeshkian just accepts it that way. Meaning, we took a far weaker stance than what we would have taken, but we needed to take that stance because we knew that we were going to have a security agreement, and we knew that it was going to take time for the security agreement to, let's say, pay off in the way that we needed to in regards to the defending and protecting Iran. That's the way I frame it, I guess, in my mind, as part of the rationale that the government of Iran has taken and being what I would call passive. Give me your take on this. How do you think they're viewing this? What is your lens? You've written the book on Iran, so you would know.
Oh yeah, I guess I did. I think you've hit the nail on the head. Pezeshkian is more popular abroad than he is in Iran right now. It's funny too. He was seen as a reformer. He's not a reformer. He's sort of a run-of-the-mill, right of center Iranian politician, and that's fine because his focus is, as it should be, on trying to build the Iranian economy. This relationship with Russia is very important because it's been in the works for more than 20 years. And finally, after 20 years, they've signed these agreements that will allow greater Russian involvement in Iranian defense. But the Iranians are at least as excited about the continued healthy trade relationships that they have with European countries. Remember, the JCPOA opened Iran to European trade. And this is kind of an interesting aside relative to the JCPOA. When Donald Trump pulled out of the JCPOA, U.S. law said that any country in the world that trades with Iran was now subject to U.S. sanctions. Well, we would have to sanction the UK, France, Germany, Japan. We're not going to do that just because we unilaterally pulled out of the JCPOA doesn't mean that everybody else in the world has to pull out of the JCPOA. And that's what they told us. They told us, forget it. And we just said, okay. And nothing has changed. So they're able to actually develop their economy, even if they have to do it through the Russians and the Chinese. They don't have any problem with that. I have 2 friends in Iran right now. And I talk to them almost every day. And they tell me that there's construction everywhere, that the economy is healthy. People have disposable income. One friend sent me a video the other night of people. It's 1 o'clock in the morning and the cafes are full and people are drinking coffee and they're eating dinner and they're talking to their friends and you can hear music in the background. That's Iran today. Our view of what Iran is not correct. It's not correct. It's a healthy, thriving economy. It's just that we're not participating in it. And one thing, too, that Americans have grossly underestimated is the import of Iran's new membership in BRICS.
Right.
There is going to be economic development in Iran. And because we are so pig-headed on our Iran policy, we're going to miss out on that.
Wow. Okay. So from your point of view, Iran's response is effectively biding time.
Yeah.
They're looking at this.
Time is on their side on this.
Do you think Israel is going to push Trump into an attack?
Oh, listen, from the moment that I walked into the CIA in January of 1990, literally every single time an Israeli prime minister came to Washington, the first thing out of his mouth was to beg us to bomb Iran. And nobody has been a worse offender than Benjamin Netanyahu. He screams it when he comes. Please bomb Iran. You have to bomb Iran. It's an existential threat. They're going to wipe us out. They have nukes. They have delivery systems. None of that's true. And at least we've had a string of presidents that have been able to hold him off. I'm not sure what Donald Trump's intentions are. And this might be what sort of begins to squeeze that zit from the bottom. And that is, do we bomb them into the Stone Age? Or do we engage them and have, essentially Nixon go to China version 2?
Give me your prediction. Give me your prognostication. I want to put you on the record. Look, I like predictions, right? Like that gives you the political acumen of the person who's talking.
I think that we will. I think we will see a direct, in-person meeting between Donald Trump and President Pezeshkian, and that nothing substantive will come of it.
Of the meeting.
Yeah. I think Trump wants so badly. I heard this from a friend of mine at the White House the other day. Trump is obsessed right now with winning the Nobel Peace Prize, right? This would be the crown jewel of his presidency, to win the Nobel Peace Prize. And he's not going to get any love from Kim Jong-un this time. But by God, he could work something out with Vladimir Putin in Ukraine. He could work something out with the Iranians. And if he worked something out with the Iranians, that would have a lasting impact.
Will King Abdullah capitulate to Trump's want to force the Palestinians from the West Bank into Jordan? And the same thing true for Egypt, by the way. Will Egypt capitulate? You don't think so?
Donald Trump yesterday threatened to cut off aid both to Egypt and Jordan if they don't accept all these Gaza Palestinians. Well, listen, 50% of the Jordanian population is Palestinian.
Right.
50%. In 1968, the Palestinian group Black September was fighting the Jordanian army literally on the steps of the palace to overthrow King Hussein and to take Jordan as the new Palestine. Okay? There's no love in Jordan for the Palestinians. They don't want one more Palestinian in their country. They don't want him. And the Egyptians are even more steadfast. They won't take any Palestinians, period. They have a population problem as it is. They can't feed their own people. There aren't enough jobs for them. They can't educate all these people. And what? They're going to take 1 million Palestinians and put them where? Yeah, a million for Jordan and 1 million for Egypt, and put them where? They're not going to do it. And there's no possible way that Donald Trump is going to cut off military aid to arguably our two closest Arab allies in the Middle East. Not a chance.
What stops him from doing so?
They'll collapse.
Oh, you mean the Egyptian government would just fundamentally collapse, and so would Jordan?
Sure. Mm-hmm.
Does Israel care that Jordan or Egypt collapses? Isn't that just territory for them?
You know, the Israelis have been very bold recently about talking about something that they call Greater Israel. It's something that people will whisper about, but they don't actually come out and say it. Lately, they've been coming out and saying it, where Greater Israel, like biblical Israel, goes all the way to the border of Iraq, takes in all of Lebanon, takes the Sinai Peninsula. That's insane to me. Mm-hmm. And I think implementation of some sort of policy that would result in the creation of Greater Israel leads to nuclear war. I really believe it.
Really?
Yeah.
That extreme?
You can't displace tens of millions of people and just take their land. You know, what Donald Trump is talking about, forcing Palestinians out of Gaza, the word forcing being the operative term here, forcing them out of Gaza, taking their land and developing it and not allowing them the right of return. That is black and white. That is a black and white war crime.
Yes.
There's no argument about the analysis. That is a war crime. It's ethnic cleansing, and you can't do it. And so to do that, you know, times 5 or 10 to create a Greater Israel, the world won't stand for it.
Not so much.
Yeah,
not so much. We'll see. I hope you're right. I mean, I've watched the world stand for a genocide over the course of the last year. We shield for it. We've allowed Netanyahu to come into the country while it was taking place, give him all the accolades in the world. Hell, it was even given a speech to both members of Congress or both branches of Congress. So I don't know. I hope you're right. He seems to be going full-throated with this attempt of this kind of ethnic cleansing of Gaza and the West Bank. He seems to be doing it in both. People just been so focused on Gaza, they've ignored the fact of what Israel is doing in the West Bank. So we'll see. He is definitely trying, though. He is swinging for the rafters.
Yeah.
And he's trying to use this kind of humanitarian argument in order to justify it. John, man, I always love talking to you, man.
Good to talk to you, Jamal.
Absolutely. John Kiriakou, former CIA operative. You can catch him and whistleblower. Definitely check John out on his Substack account. Definitely check him out on Twitter, and definitely check out his engagements that are going to take place over the next year. Thank you, my man. I appreciate
Thank you.
This.
Good to see you.
Have a good one, John. Be safe. All right. We have come to the end of the show. Shout out to John Kiriakou. Always love talking to him. We have 2 chats. Let's go for the first one. Mr. Ripley, U.S. conscription. How else can Donald Trump possibly think about it like a chess player or checkers player, which is more of Donald Trump's speed? I don't think he can do a U.S. conscription. I don't think this is going to be a purely military operation by Israel if indeed they do that. In the same way they were able to destroy everything and push those people from one place to the next, I guess his thinking is they can do the same thing and push them to the borders of Egypt, or for that matter, to the borders of Jordan, and that both countries would allow the people to come in. You heard John Kiriakou saying not a chance. We'll see. Mark is saying Trump has the power to do it. John is like, no way. No way. And by the way, I love it when that happens because it means it's not an echo chamber. Like I love it when two guests who know this stuff very well. John wrote the book on Iran. Mark has a clear eye on foreign policy more than pretty much anybody else I've come across. And they are coming to two different assessments on Trump's capabilities in this issue. Fascinating. I love that. I love that. This is Papa Onaya Shelley. This guy has his finger on the pulse. Bernie is equivalent to Trump. Bernie is not equivalent to Trump. Thank you for your membership. Papa Onaya Shelley, thank you for your membership. I deeply appreciate it. Welcome to the family. But Sanders and Trump are not a one-to-one. If they were, Bernie Sanders would be in office right now. Bernie Sanders is not in office right now. And, you know, I don't get the sense that Donald Trump, if indeed he was in a similar position as Bernie Sanders, would ever come out and say that Joe Biden is the modern day equivalent of FDR. Nonsense. That's nonsense. I don't believe for a moment that Sanders would get fucked over royally, dick and ass, to be vulgar, in the way that happened to him in the Democratic Party primaries twice, and still come out and support that party full-throatedly in the way that he does. I don't see Trump doing that. I see Trump being far more petty, and that's petty with a purpose in that sense, or petty for good reason to be petty in that sense. I don't see Sanders being that guy. I just don't. I don't see it. I don't see it in him. He is far too weak. And it's not about what he's saying. What he's saying, love it. Love it. You can wake Bernie Sanders up at 3 a.m. in a dead sleep. Sanders, what do you believe in? Healthcare, education, with unemployment, increase the amount that people are getting for wages, increase in medical benefits for Medicare, et cetera. Meaning he knows what he is. And I appreciate that. Kind of like a Rand Paul or Ron Paul. They know what they are. It's not about the movement of the political party to be purely reactive to whoever they're against. He knows who he is. No issue with that. It's the capability in being able to have force of will to pursue that and to pursue it against opposition, either by people who you consider to be allies in a way, and against your opponents and your enemies. And if your allies, you realize, are not your allies, to be able to put a knife in them to pursue your agenda. It's not the agenda I take issue with. It's Sanders' capability of pursuing it, being able to forcibly push through his political will in a similar way that Donald Trump was able to forcibly push through his political will. Sanders is not that guy. He's just not. No, I don't believe Sanders was blackmailed. Not at all. I just think he's too weak for it. Pressure was applied. Pressure was applied. All right, I'm going to end this. Somebody said, Ruben says, I miss John. Yeah, John is a great guest. John is a really good guest. All right, I'm going to end this. Tomorrow, I have Colonel Wilkerson. That is going to be a damn good show. So definitely check me out for that. He's going to come on at 8 a.m. I am trying. By the way, if you dig this content, like the video. Hit the like button before you leave. Share the content if you find yourself digging it. If you really find yourself digging it and coming back here often, consider giving to the content. These videos are often demonetized, so what you give is effectively covering the video itself, and I always appreciate you guys for doing so. If you really find yourself coming back here, you can always support through PayPal, Patreon, or for the matter, Super Chat, Super Stickers, memberships, those type of things. All of it helps the content. As some people say, buy me a cup of coffee. Buy me a cup of coffee. I am trying new things with the show. Nothing dramatic, more so trying to see, for transparency's sake, I think I'm doing something wrong. And if I think I'm doing something wrong, the catch becomes, okay, well, what are you doing wrong and how do you correct it? The only way to do that is through experimentation. And so I'm experimenting with seeing whether or not there needs to be 4 or 5 guests, whether you can get away with covering stories. Because what I realize and what I think is true is people don't come to your channel because of the news. You can get the news from anywhere. They're usually coming for some amalgam of the news and the person who's giving the news and what that person exudes, whether or not they think it's true or false. how it's coming across, how the person gives the news, that type of stuff. And so whether that's a guest thing or whether that's a person thing, which means that at 7 a.m., I'm still having guests at 7 a.m. It could be Ritter, it could be various people who would come on at that time frame. But I'm thinking whether or not news segments also work. So there is that, effectively going over a news bit as news, as opposed to having a guest to be with you going over as news. There's some guests who I'm realizing are people who you have interviews with, where I am bringing this person on an interview. Mark Sloboda, Scott Ritter, Wilkerson are really good examples of interviews. The other people you bring on for conversations, I don't exactly know how to make that work when the person is remote, as opposed to you just sitting there with the person talking to them and there's a camera covering both. There's a difference in those things and the way that those things translate. I don't know. Just thinking it through. But I'm going to end this. I'm going to say like it, share it, subscribe to it. Some people do come to troll. It's what it is. I always say don't feed the trolls. From my point of view, there's just an extra view. It's an extra, tick in regards to who watch. I don't care. I've been doing this for 10 years. I've never cared about the trolls. I never paid attention to the trolls that come on the channel. Some trolls are actually converted into viewers, believe it or not. You'd be surprised on some of the letters I get from people. So no, I don't care about the trolls. They're just views. Let's see. You're doing good work, Jamal. The geopolitical podcast space is just very crowded. That is true. It's hard to stand out, especially from a newcomer. But I'm not. Am I a newcomer? Ish. Arcane, yes, I accept that. I gripe at the newcomer stuff, even though I guess you're right. I gripe at it because I feel like I've been doing this for like 10 years. But you're right. The channel has changed since being at the radio station. How could it not? Like, you're at a radio station where you are effectively looking at the world. Like, your job was to be perched at the edge of the world. And so that's where you sat, at the edge of the world. And so it's kind of hard to have a good job like that. And then your point of view gets narrowed into something like a secular talk or TYT or whatever I was when I first initially started doing YouTube, where you just kind of did stories and you would do one story after the next. Your view changes. You become more awake to what is happening on a geopolitical stage. And what happens domestically, I'm not going to say matters less, but kind of matters less. It's not entirely true because you live here, but it is true in regards to your focal point. It just becomes more global. You have channels like Alexander McCarris that were doing this and does it exceptionally well. McCarris doesn't really do interviews. Every so often he does, and Brenda Blue Moon. But there are one or two other channels that do something similar. So fair enough. I accept that. All right. I am going to end this. I'm going to say like. I'm going to say share. I'm going to say subscribe. Jamal Thomas Morning Show, episode 92. Signing off. You guys have a phenomenal day.